Welcome to the Del County Board of Supervisors meeting this day, July 10th, 2018. We are returning from closed session. County Council, is there anything to report out today? Is there anything to report out of closed session, Joel?
Yeah, in closed session, the board voted unanimously to join a lawsuit called Kane County versus United States to recover underpayment of PILT monies from 2015, 16, and 17. It's a class action lawsuit.
Thank you, Joel. All right, we're going to pause briefly for a moment of reflection. Thank you. Supervisor Gitlin, please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, do we have any introductions today of new employees? Nope. All right. And at this time, I'd like to request any deletions, corrections, or additions for the board members to the agenda. Okay. Seeing none, we have a few minutes, so I'd like to move forward with the consent agenda. Comments from members of the public may be heard at this time regarding matters on the consent agenda only. Let's go ahead and open up the consent agenda for public comment. Okay. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and bring...
Mr. Chairman, with regard to the consent agenda, I'd like to make the motion to approve, and after hopefully everything is passed, I see DA Katie Mix is here. I'd like her to I've received a number of calls to explain items 7 through 18, the nature of the issues afterward per the chairman, and I will give that motion now to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion second on the table. Kylie, please pull the vote.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. Good morning. Supervisor Gitlin requested some comments. Please feel free.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning.
In terms of the agenda items 7 through 18, the District Attorney's Office is correlated with the Victim Witness Office, which is grant funded. And in order to get the grant funds to operate Victim Witness, the requirement of the grant is that the Office of Victim Witness enter into operational agreements with various agencies in the county that also assist victims. And those agencies include the Intertribal Council of California, the Tolowa Nation Community and Family Services Department Domestic Violence Program, the Police Department, the Del Norte Community Health Center, the DA's Criminal Division, which is my office, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Del Norte Senior Center, the Del Norte Sheriff's Office, the Probation Department, North Coast Rape Crisis, Redwood Legal Services, and the Harrington House with Rural Human Services. And each operational agreement has been approved by County Council, and the head of each department that I just named has signed those agreements, as well as myself. And those agreements will allow these departments to work together to better serve victims. I spoke with Victim Witness today, and they talked about how often they're servicing the same clients, people who are victims of crimes come into the Victim Witness Office. They will also maybe go to their tribal domestic violence department, and these operational agreements allow these agencies to work together, communicate with each other, and better serve victims.
District Attorney Mix, just a quick question because it was asked of me, and I'll ask of you. These are, I think there's 12 separate actions here. I don't remember voting on this 3 years ago. Or is this a perfunctory thing? Is this something you're going to come before our board annually with, or is it every 3 years?
It's every 3 years,
okay.
And I'm not sure if the former victim witness coordinator brought these before the board, as should have happened 3 years ago, but I do know that each of these agreements expired in July, so they needed to be redone, and we're required under the grant to have a list of those and have these in our office to provide to Cal OES if they come to audit the grant.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move on with our timed agenda item, which is public comment. Members of the public may address the board on matters which are within the jurisdiction of the board. If you are addressing the board regarding a matter listed on the agenda, you may be asked to hold your comments until the board takes up that matter. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Public comment, please.
Linda Sutter, County. I noticed item number 30. I don't know if you're going to be discussing that or not. If not, I'd like to know now. Are you going to be discussing item 30?
That's why it's on the agenda.
Yeah, okay. Also, I thought that the beginning of the fiscal year was July 1st. And I don't see anything about a budget, so apparently y'all will just rubber stamp that too. Thank you.
Public comment, please. Please. Thank you. While we're waiting, Mr. Dorigo, please. Thank you. Thank you. Just give us a second. We'll get through this one first. Please, Mr. Dorigo.
Hi, my name is Robert Dorigo, District 1 resident. I'm on the Cannabis Work Group. I just wanted to, bring it to your attention as far as our organization. I understand we've recommended an ordinance, and it's probably being drafted, and I'm going to go through the Planning Commission. And, excuse me, just once in a while I still get the public jitters, but, so we lost our license at Delmar Patients Together in Elk Valley on like June 9th, and I think on the 20th for the medical. And then we have a license on the highway that expires on the 21st. Of course, we expect to lose the license for probably several months, while the new ordinance goes through the Planning Commission, gets adopted hopefully, and then while we go back through the Planning Commission to get the license. And it's been, not the county, is only one part. A lot of the industry wasn't really ready. So there's lots of little hiccups for me in supplying product at this place. And so we went through a transition to bring in material that's now compliant with the state, and it's been difficult, and now we're trying to figure out how to stay stocked, through the period where we're going to have to operate basically as a collective, and then we're going to have to transition, back out of material again, so for us there's several transitions, because of the county's policy right now and how we're kind of working on it here. So I just wanted to let you guys know that, we've been hiring, and so we're a little afraid of, the structure of things, how things are going to pan out here with all the transitions in our, in our industry right now. But I just wanted to keep the feel on that ordinance, so we can continue to stock what we need to stock at our organization. Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Please, public comment.
Hi, my name is Janet Eason, and I am a grateful recipient of in-home support services. If it weren't for them or for my worker, I would probably be in an institution. And so I'm very, very grateful for their services. I think if I were in an institution, it would cost the government far more money than it is to pay my caregiver. And I really would like it if they were paid more for their services. They're a godsend, believe me. That's pretty much all I wanted to say, except God bless them. Please give them a raise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back, please. If you could be ready, if anybody else is going to give public comment today, if you could be ready, that's the next speaker. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm not very good at public speaking. Hello, my name is Aaron Skroback, registered voter in District 1. Roger Gitlin is my supervisor. Recently discovered that Roger Gitlin has blocked me on social media. In other words, I cannot comment on any of his posts nor read what he has said. Never have they made any threats or shown any acts of aggression towards the supervisor nor any member of this community. But I will state my opinion as is granted by the First Amendment, something that Roger obviously does not agree with. Recently, he has called for the editor of the Triplicate to be removed from his job because they did not run an article on Lori Cowan or Heidi Kimes' recall, but did for Roger and Bob. They have since ran a piece on Lori and Heidi. Nevertheless, from what I've read, a federal court has ruled recently that a public official does not have the right to block users from commenting on their social media post as it infringes on their First Amendment right to free speech. Blocking a person from commenting that does not agree with a public official's beliefs or policies gives them a false appearance of support that may not be there. Then the public never hears the other side of any argument as the opposition is blocked from commenting. Perhaps I had a suggestion on how additional funds the county is to receive should be spent, but cannot do so on Roger's post as he has me blocked. It is true that I am part of the recall effort for Roger Gitlin and Bob Berkowitz, as their shenanigans such as this need to come to an end. As much as I'd like the recall to happen, it probably won't this time. So all the screenshots of what I'd like to call Roger's rants will have to wait until he is up for re-election, along with a video compilation of his public speaking tirades. If I am blocked, there are sure to be others as well. Would like council to weigh in on the legality or ethics of this practice of blocking social media users from commenting on a public official's post. It is my belief that this is a violation of the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the peoples peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
Thank you. Please. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Teresa Schnacker. I'm an IHSS caregiver, and I'm supporting for a livable wage. And thank you.
Thank you. Please. Good morning.
Good morning. My name's Chris Huey. I'm new to the county. I've been here a few years. What I want to address is the striping of the streets, the crosswalks, the roadways. They're not consistent. Some of the crosswalks are 60% washed away. You cannot see them. You got the new one right there by Old Mill Road, where you put up a nice fancy sign with the blinking lights, but the crosswalk itself is almost faded out. That's one agenda I wanted to talk about. The second one is the county is going to have to depend on tourism. So we need to spend money on the repainting the curbs, the sidewalks, keep that up so the county looks more presentable to the public who comes through here through the summer and spend their money in our hotels, our restaurants, and all that. More of an agenda to beautify the county and the city itself, so more tourists come, more finances are spent, you guys make more tax and money in the county, you guys get a better profit. You have an allocated state fund that just came in of roughly 1.1 million, from what I understand in the newspaper. I could be wrong, but that's what I think, it's something around that amount. The old projective was 600,000 to 700,000. If you could take 200,000 of that money and beautify the city, you have entrances by Burger King where the two roadways meet. There's an open field right in the middle of the street, a little planter. It's terrible. It should be beautified. So when the people drive through, like they did the county, like you did the fairgrounds, how they did all the fairgrounds, they should do the same thing on everywhere they can to beautify the city, to bring more income into the city. Because to me, that the lumber and the crabs and the fishing aren't going to carry the county. It's going to have to be tourism. So you need to spend more money on that, and that's my agenda.
Thank you for your comments, Chris.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm here in solidarity with my brothers and sisters in the union. I just want to come and tell you that we all are fighting for a raise in home care. We deserve it because we do help a lot of clients in their homes and try to keep them out of institutions. So please, please do give us a raise, and we'd be really appreciated that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning again.
Good morning again. I just wanted to thank you guys for your guys' work, and it's a big responsibility to affect so many lives, but fair consideration would be great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good morning.
Okay, if there's no further public comment at this time, please. Good morning.
Good morning. Just wanted to stop in to Kurt Stremberg from Stremberg Realty in regards to last chance grade to let you know, and hopefully we can get it out to the public more from that end, that there is a meeting, public meeting at the fairgrounds on the 19th, and I'd like to see everyone show up for that just to gain some more support for what's going on and get everyone on board to know what is going on and what's taking place with that regard. So please get it out there, and then we will have a stakeholders meeting coming up in August, 2 days on the 17th. I believe it's the 17th and the 21st. That'll be out there as well. But anyway, hope to see everyone there and get a good turnout. Thank you.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Kurt. I know the Del Norte Local Transportation Commission at great expense actually mailed out these to every resident in Del Norte County.
Yes.
And so everybody should have received these in the mail by now, but hopefully that'll help spur on the discussion, more importantly, the transparency to get the word out there.
Yes.
Appreciate you coming
All right.
today to
Thank you.
give us your attention to this. All right, any further public comment at this time? Okay, we're going to go ahead and bring it back to the board. Our next timed agenda item is at 10:25, so at this point in time, I'd like to go ahead and move forward with the budget transfers, which are items 33, 34, and 35. Transfer items 0607, 0609, and 06-10. Let's go ahead and open those up for public comment.
Mr. Chairman, I would move for approval on budget transfer 0607 in the amount of $7,199. Budget transfer 0609 in the amount of $70,000. And budget transfer 06-10 in the amount of $38,000.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the table. Kylie, please pull the vote.
Supervisor
Mr. Chairman,
Gitlin?
question,
Yes.
point of order. Is it Ms. Sutter, were you just inquiring about those two, that transfer? I'm sorry, I misunderstood which number on the budget transfer. What the hell? Okay, disregard, thank you.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right. We've got a few minutes, so let's go ahead and move on with item number 30, which is approve and authorize the county administrative officer to draft a response regarding the 2017-18 grand jury report as requested by the county administrative officer. Jay?
So as everybody is aware, the grand jury report comes out annually, and it has been brought out. There are some responsibilities that the Board of Supervisors has, along with the departments that are actually investigated or reviewed. In the case of the Board of Supervisors, any type of recommendation or finding that deals with a financial or budgetary recommendation, or something that deals with a staffing situation, the board has a response that is required, and these go back to the presiding judge. So at this point, I have looked through it. There are a couple of items that I believe would be the responsibility of the board for a response, and if the board would so choose, I can draft up that response along with the department and bring that back to the Board of Supervisors for consideration and discussion, any changes, and then bring back a final. We have 90 days in which for the Board of Supervisors does for responding. individual departments and department heads have 60 days.
Thank you, Jay. Any questions for Jay at this time? Okay, let's go ahead and open this up for public comment.
Linda Sutter, $921,000. Wow, that's a lot of money. And nobody knows what it was spent on. The fairgrounds, the taxes that we all pay, $921,000. I would hope that this board would bring the fair folks in and explain to us where that money went. Now, I know those bushes out there that they put to make it look nice, certainly that didn't cost $921,000. So please, do your job and investigate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and bring it back to the board. Do we have a motion to authorize Jay to prepare comment?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Kylie, please poll the vote.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right, we have a few minutes left. Let's go ahead and move on to item number 31, which is discussed by title 1.00.020, rule number 2, duties of officers of Del Norte County Administrative Policy and Procedures Manual and direct staff as appropriate. We put this item on the agenda recently as we're having difficulties and have had difficulties over the last couple of years with supervisors fulfilling their duties as a supervisor, in particular specific to committees. Recently, we had this discussion at our last board meeting where our laundry was aired to the public about some of the concerns supervisors had about attending meetings, and it really came down to personality issues. But I thought some concessions were made and we would move on. But lo and behold, we had another letter that came in through the local transportation commission recently that basically said, and I'm not going to quote it at this time, but it essentially said I can't work with two supervisors or a member of the city council on this transportation commission, and at this point I'm not going to move on. And so specifically I wanted to have this discussion because I believe it's long overdue that the burden of essentially making sure the public is well represented, not just your district but also the county, is carried by every elected official sitting up here, and we need to ensure that the communication is taking place whether there's personality issues or not. And my hope is that we can move forward in a concise manner in creating a policy that'll allow some level of commitment by the board to ensuring that they're fulfilling their role as a board of supervisor on these committees, and that's just not a process that could willy-nilly be handed off based on whether or not you have a personality conflict with another board member. And so that's the discussion I'd like to open up for the board today. It doesn't need to be about finger pointing or anything or any particular supervisor. I just want to know whether or not there's some willingness to have some commitment through policy of this board about ensuring that we fulfill our duties as an elected supervisor. And I'd open up for discussion at this time and, more importantly, public comment.
Okay. So it seems I'm probably misunderstanding this, but the first paragraph goes to of this rule talks about how you're supposed to go through each agenda item, and I don't even know why you guys have that there because that's not done. Thank you.
Okay, any other public comment at this time? Okay, very good. We'll go ahead and bring it back to the board. Please weigh in. Feel free to weigh in at this time. I'd like to know if there's some willingness to direct staff to create a policy specific to our policies and this rule number 2. And if you need Jay to read it, I certainly am happy to have him read it for you. Jay?
So what's in the agenda at this point under rules? 100.001, Rule 1, election of officers. A, the Board of Supervisors shall elect a chairperson, vice chairman among its members at the first regular meeting in January. B, the current chairperson shall open the meeting, hold nominations, and conduct election process through the majority vote. Under duties of officers, the chairperson shall preside over, preserve order and decorum at, and announce each agenda item or each agenda item number if on consent agenda before the board at all board meetings unless otherwise provided by these rules. The chairperson shall decide all questions of order and procedure, subject to appeal by any supervisor or the board as a whole. B, while the chairperson is absent from the board meeting or for any other reason relinquishes the chair, the vice chairperson shall assume the office of chairperson. C, if both the chairperson and vice chairperson are absent from the board meeting, the most senior supervisor, as determined by time and office, shall assume the office and duties of the chairperson. If the time in office is even between two or more supervisors, the supervisor most recently holding the office of chairperson shall be the acting chairperson. D, the chairperson may discuss and vote upon any matter as a member of the board without relinquishing the chair. E, the chairperson at his or her discretion shall in January of each year present a state of the county message. F, the chairperson at his or her discretion shall in January of each year or immediately upon expiration of a term appoint members of the board to each ex officio board member position on other governing bodies or boards and committees and commissions of the board, provided that such appointments shall be confirmed by the board. Such appointments shall be made in the following priority order. 1, the incumbent supervisor shall be reappointed unless the supervisor provides notification to the chairperson that his or her option for reappointment will not be exercised. 2, in the event of the incumbent supervisor has relinquished his or her right to reappointment, the most senior supervisor requesting to serve on the committee or commission or board shall be appointed. 3, any dispute between 2 or more board members with equal time in office shall be resolved by the chairperson. G, the chairperson is required to place his or her signature on file with the Secretary of State. The necessary documents to effect this requirement shall be prepared by the clerk of the board. And H, the chairperson is responsible for signing all documents as authorized by the board. Whenever a wet signature is not legally required, the clerk of the board may, at the chairperson's request, use a signature stamp.
Thank you, Jay. So in particular, item number F is where we're going to try to gear this conversation today. And if there's some willingness by the board to revisit these policies to actually require, to a certain extent, these committee appointments be followed through.
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me address that.
Please.
My concerns last meeting were addressed and successfully resolved last meeting.
Yes, and I would agree with you.
Okay.
Your concerns. But there's...
Those are the only concerns that I can address.
Yes, I understand that. But there's one concern that still needs to be addressed, and I'm hoping Supervisor Gitlin could weigh in on that.
But this is not about finger pointing.
This is about
Excuse me,
attending
sir, I have the
committee
floor.
meetings.
Excuse me, I have the floor. Please don't interrupt me. This is not about finger pointing. I'm going to not say his name until I absolutely have to. There's your chairman right there. And here's the bottom line. This local transportation commission is made up of 3 supervisors. From the day I go in there, anything I say or anything I suggest is going to be summarily negated by 2 of the supervisors that are sitting up here and another city council person. It's all about personality. It wouldn't matter what I'm suggesting. But we're going to single out Gitlin right here on television, and we're going to call him out. I said I'd consider it when I looked at the rules. Rules are made to go 2 ways, folks. We have Supervisor Hemmingson over there who says, I don't want to serve on the Solid Waste Commission. It's not a good fit. You get a pass on that, Supervisor Hemmingson. But let's get to Gitlin. Gitlin says, I don't want to serve here because my voice is not heard. My voice is not respected. It's certainly not embraced. We're just going to make like slavery and force you to go here, and we're going to publicly embarrass you. Well, I'll wear that like a medal on around me, whatever this thing is. I'm not going to serve on a committee that doesn't care what I think or say any which way. You need to find someone with a better fit, Mr. Chairman. It isn't Gitlin on the Local Transportation Commission. Now, I serve on many other committees, some of which are with people who I maybe don't see eye to eye with, but we're not going to call you out on that. We're just going to call you out on this one. So you're not sincere when you say this is not about finger pointing. It is all about finger pointing. And until the majority of this board gets its act together and stops going into these personality, juvenile high school issues, we're going to have this kind of chemistry. Now let's look at F. Let's look at F just up there. I was on a number of committees when Mr. Chairman Howard took over, and I said I'd like to be taken off one or these two committees and put in these committees. None of that was respected. I was pulled off almost every committee. So, Mr. Chairman, you were in violation of F of the rules in order with regard to my previous commitments to stay on certain assignments. You pulled that off arbitrarily, but the board approved it. Folks, rules got to move both ways. It isn't about whether you like me or not like me. It's what I represent. And the people of my district elected me twice. They're not happy about that. So I think I'll stay off that committee until you find another supervisor on this board who's willing to serve in that committee. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is not about one specific committee or other. It's about serving on committees that you're appointed to. And it's just not the Transportation Committee. That's the one that I called up in this conversation. But it seems like at least there's some willingness.
Excuse me, what other committees are there?
I guess it's my turn to have the floor.
Yeah, please identify the other committees.
So it sounds like that at least from the supervisor's comments, there's some willingness to have this discussion and maybe revisit this conversation with staff and have a discussion about some other rules that could go in here in our board policy specific to committee appointments and what kind of weight they carry. But please weigh in and feel free.
I think it's really important with the committees. They take a lot of time and commitment. I personally sit on quite a few. I think I have a list of them. I sit on the Area 1 Aging. That was one of yours before, but you were asked to leave. Sit on the Border Coast Regional Airport Authority, BHC Healthcare Initiative, Community Health Alliance, Del Norte Solid Waste, another one I'm sitting on because Mr. Gitlin was asked to leave. Indian Gaming Local Benefit Committee, the IGRC, the Juvenile Justice, I sit on the Last Chance Stakeholders Group, the Mental Health Advisory Board, again, one of Mr. Gitlin's that was asked to be relieved, Redwood Coast Transit Authority, the Senator McGuire's, I work with him on the Homeless Committee, I sit on the Visitors Bureau, Healthcare Districts 2x2, City County Schools 2x2, City County 2x2, Safe and Healthy Families, and a Healthy Workforce. That is on top of all my duties, just regular meetings. And I have 2 other jobs. So it takes a lot of my time, and I do it because I love it. I do it because I'm giving back to my community, and I think it's extremely important. So it is frustrating when other supervisors say, well, I don't want to sit on that board because I don't like her, or she was mean to me, or I don't like him. It's about being adults. It's about doing your job. We don't all see eye to eye, and that's what makes boards and committees what they are, is to have those opposing views and opinions come into play. And it's extremely important to have those opposing views, as you say you have. And it's important, we were elected, we are here for you guys. We are here to do a job. It's not that I get to pick and choose what I want to do. I was given these boards, and some I have because Mr. Gitlin either wouldn't take them or he was asked to leave. So I had to pick them up. You know, I've embraced every one of them. I do them constantly. They consume my life. But I don't bitch and whine and say I won't do it because I don't like somebody or I have a different personality than them. It's a job that I was elected to do by all of you sitting in this room. And I just think it's really important that everybody does the same job. Mr. Berkowitz had some issues, but he's right. We talked about that last time. He committed to going back to the 6 that he had asked not to do. And I'm assuming he will follow up on that. I believe he will. He talked about a meeting he's going to miss tomorrow, and he had a conversation with me to let me know that he won't be able to make it. So that gives me the impression that he is going to fulfill his duty. So that's just my take on it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Hamilton.
Yeah, since I was singled out, I guess I probably should have some response. I agree with Supervisor Cowan. I'm on a considerable number of committees. It's part of the job. It's really some of the most important things that we do, so that we can be informed and make informed decisions when we come to this board. And because of personalities, I'm guessing some supervisors have decided not to attend meetings, and that really baffles me because we're all here. So if they refuse to be on these other committees because one of us or two of us are on these other committees, why do they choose to come to this meeting with all of us here? So it's baffling to me. It's part of the job. You know, my feeling about it is do your job.
Thank you. Jay, if we were to move forward with some direction today, what might that look like? Is that something that you could handle within your office, or is that something that could be visited by county council or by both?
Typically, when it comes to the admin manual, that would come through a direction of the Board of Supervisors with some details so that we can then focus on what the board is looking for, come back with any alternatives based on that. And yeah, whatever we do, typically we have assistance through county council's office, but in response to the admin manual, that's generally going to come through administration at direction of the board.
So I guess I'd like to really start flushing out F as it pertains to committees and the service by the board on those committees as specified at the beginning of the year, appointed by the chair and approved by the board, and how that might look if one board member or another board member without due cause could arbitrarily remove themselves from that committee. So how would you feel if at this point we directed staff to take a look at that issue specifically, a board member arbitrarily removing themselves from a committee without good cause, and what that might look like specific to language within this policy?
Well, if that's the direction of the board, then we would look at other policies that are out there. We're not going to recreate the wheel typically. We're going to look at policies of other counties, like counties typically, and see what they've done, and then bring back alternatives for the board to consider. That would be the most straightforward way to do it if that's the direction of the board. And of course, you know, we have to then vet that through county council to make sure anything that is put in writing is legal. These are procedures set by the board. So
Thank you.
As the board directs, that's what we'll come up with.
Okay. Supervisor Berkowitz.
Mr. Chairman, if we're going to look at F, I would suggest that we look at all the tenets of F, 1, 2, and 3. Considering we're going to look at F, we might as well take up the entire provision of F.
Yep, agreed, Supervisor.
Chair, this may be going a little bit further out than we are planning on, but I had a conversation with Elisa, and she's getting several calls on code of ethics. And and this is kind of all on policy, and I don't know if it fits into here, but you talk about getting into calling other counties and what they're doing. The question has been asked about does the Board of Supervisors have a code of ethics? And we don't. And I have another job that I do, and we all take training when we are brought into office that we do every 2 years. But I think there's other things that need to be followed and looked at, and maybe while you are reaching out, since we are getting calls on this into the county office, that maybe you can check with other counties as well if everybody else agrees on what they're doing as far as code of ethics.
Yeah, I'd leave that up to Joel whether or not we could discuss that under these duties of the officer, but I'm assuming you could weigh in as you feel fit to see if a code of ethics is acceptable under item A or not.
It's just direction to staff. It doesn't bother me.
Okay, terrific then. So, yeah, that might be something to consider. Obviously, you made mention of the ethics training we do take as board members, but it's not specific to policies under Delaware County. So if there's additional steps that you're looking to take there, maybe while staff is researching specifics for item number F, we could also research what other counties have done internally on code of ethics outside the ethics training that we do go through with the Fair Political Practices Commission. Okay. Okay. very good.
I'm not.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Then,
I have another thing too.
Please.
Seem to be
Supervisor.
having lots of things to say. You look around and you try to stand up for what you think is right. And some people don't like that. I want to remind everybody here that I did not wish to be taken off a number of committees where there was no opposition. The chairman did his due diligence and he said, you're off this committee. And that was approved by the board, which violates one of these rules right here. I'll use future facilities. I never asked to be off of that, but I was taken off. No good reason, against violation of rules. Also the issue of Air Quality Management District. I did a very good job. Never missed a meeting, was a productive member of the staff. No, you're off of it. So we have this one-way street where I have some issues with some of the agencies I worked with, Solid Waste Authority, and I spoke up clearly. And this is an effort to silence my voice. It wasn't insulting of anybody. I don't agree with the way certain things were operating then. Missing money, you take your pick. And in regard to, as Supervisor Cowan alludes to, the Aging Commission, the the board, with regard to that, I had some issues with whether seniors are being served. You speak up, and then, no, we don't want to hear that. We want to get someone who's going to yes us. We want all these yes votes. Well, let me tell everyone here, diversity is a good thing. When you have all these 5-0 votes up here, you better be looking at people to say, what are you doing to serve our needs? I will continue to do that. I will continue to speak out. When I think something is wrong, I will speak out. Whether you are my party or not, it matters not. So this witch hunt here, which the chairman is walling in, looking to code of ethics, I think we had that discussion 2 years ago with a former supervisor here. It went nothing. Go ahead. Knock yourself out. Do what you need to do. I'm going to do what's right, and I'm going to continue to do what's right. And sometimes it's not going to be popular with some of my colleagues up here. You can't have rules that just affect one person. I'll challenge Supervisor Hemmingson right now. Put yourself back on the board that you said it's not a good fit on, the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority Board. Do that. Don't tell everybody here it's not a good fit for me, and then go after Gitlin. That's disingenuous. So when you have these exceptions to these kinds of things in an effort to quiet me up, the exact opposite is going to take place. And I'll continue to speak up. Many of you here in this room have called me and talked to me and said, I need this forwarded. Will you go to work? Some of our supervisors don't even answer phone calls. There isn't a person in this room who, whatever your party, that I haven't called you back directly, what's on your mind? And we'll continue to do that. If it's not popular, my condolences to you. I'll take the position that I think is right. So on this witch hunt, and we're not finger pointing, just understand the street goes two ways. You can't have something just for one person because we don't like you or we don't think you're productive. I answer to the voters who elected me twice. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Supervisor. All right, if there's no further comment from the board, I'd entertain a motion at this time to revisit our policies and procedures, particular 1.00.020, specific to item number F, and those numbered 1, 2, and 3 under there, and in addition, item number A, specific to a code of ethics.
Do you need a vote or do you need just direction? Joel?
We could take direction, we could have a vote. I'd rather have a vote, though. Okay.
Okay. I
So-
make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Kylie, please poll the vote.
Supervisor Gitlin?
No.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
No.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yeah.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right, we're going to go ahead with our 1025 timed item, which is the National Recreation Area Fire Preparedness for 2018 Fire Season presentation by Jeff Marzal. Jeff, welcome back. It's a very timely discussion for you here today, given that some of the most recent reports that we've heard could present clear and present danger for Del Norte County this weekend. And I know that wasn't what the models projected in our last conversation up in Gasky, but it is now. So I think you're your conversation here today is well timed.
Yeah, I think that, excuse me, I do think the timing is really good, and I think when we met in Gasky a few weeks ago, we called it a pre-fire season meeting, but you'll be hearing from Michael Frederick here that we are indeed in fire season officially right now. And again, I'm Jeff Marzell. I'm the relatively new district ranger of the NRA. I keep saying new, but I think my new label is going to start wearing off here soon. I do appreciate the opportunity to be back here in this venerated chamber. And Supervisor Howard asked us to come here today to kind of talk about some of the things that we talked about at that pre-fire season meeting, recognizing that we spent a good half an hour to 45 minutes talking about these things, and I understand we have about 10 to 15 minutes, so what we're going to discuss today is more of a distilled version of what we discussed at that meeting. And so what we're going to try to cover today is, first I'm going to very briefly describe values at risk in the context of wildland fire management. Secondly, Michael Frederick, who's the fire management officer for the Gasky Ranger District, is going to provide a brief season fire forecast, a history of kind of fire in the district, and sort of some ideas about how we'll be approaching wildland firefighting in 2018. And the largest part of our presentation will come from Sheila Ballant, who is our district fuels planner, and she's going to be providing an overview of the fuels projects that we're working on to make sure that we're being proactive in fire management, not always being reactive. And so values at risk, for those who don't know what that means, values at risk are basically things that are important to us as a district, things that are important to the community that we consider when fires are burning on the district. And of course, the number one value at risk is the lives and safety of our firefighters and the public. There's nothing more important than that. And so we only ask our firefighters to engage in firefighting activities that have the highest probability of success and are commensurate with those values at risk. That's critical to us. Obviously, property is something that's really, really important. We're talking about communities, homes, people in places where people live. Thirdly, critical infrastructure. We're always looking at power lines, water lines, roads. Obviously, maintaining and keeping those essential infrastructures in place is essential to maintaining safe communities. Fourthly, ecological and cultural values. We are a national recreation area. We have a lot of biological resources, so we're always thinking about ways that we can minimize when we can, our unwanted effects to those natural resources, again, wildlife, fisheries, water quality, etc. And really importantly for me is another value at risk when we have wildland fires are relationships with our communities. I've seen too many times where these fires create a situation where we end up with unwanted outcomes because the district, the forest, was not communicating well with our public, with our communities. So I'm going to come here and tell you all that I'm committed to making sure that if and when we have large incidents on the district, that I'll be communicating with you regularly. My communication will be timely. My communication will be accurate. And that's also true when we have fire on neighboring districts. I know you had an issue last year with the Chitko Bar fire, and you had fires coming over from Happy Camp, of course, where I came from. But I have relationships with all of those other units. So if we have wildland fire incidents that are moving towards this district and this community from those other units, I promise to you is I will keep you informed as much as I can and make sure that information is getting back to you in a timely manner. And lastly, and this is something Sheila's going to get into in a lot of detail, obviously we want to be proactive. How do we build resilient communities? We don't want to all be about fighting fire. We want to get ahead of these fires. We want to have an offense and not only have a defense. And so we're going to get into more of those issues. And you've heard what I discussed last time. We have a very vigorous program of work that relates to timber sales, fuels reductions, those kinds of things, and Sheila's going to get into that in more detail. And just really fast, you had asked a question last time about marijuana growing, and I can talk about that now, or we could talk about that later. Was that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you'd asked a question about trespass on the NRA. So I talked to my law enforcement officer, and we do have trespass issues on the NRA, but the scale of them in compared to Trinity County, Humboldt County, and even Siskiyou County is a lot less. The number of grows are a lot less, and the grows themselves are much smaller. And the illegal activities that are going on in the NRA, the folks that are there, they plant some plants. We're talking maybe 150 plants to 300 plants. Apparently, they don't live there. So they're not like residing there. And because of all those issues, the impacts are quite a bit less. Now, of course, the caveat to this is we haven't had a surveillance of our forest since 2013. So this information is slightly dated. We have no reason to believe, based on what my law enforcement officer told me, that we have an increase in those activities, but I can't guarantee that we don't. So I think it would be really important for the forest and for the county to partner up and see if we can get some additional surveillance of the forest to be able to go out and look for those growths if we can. So that's that's my answer to you, and I'd be willing to work with the county and see if we can get more resources into this area to basically do more of that surveillance work, to see exactly what's going on out there, because again, this report is about 5 years old.
Thank you. Please.
Jeff, thanks for the good report. And yes, I did ask you about illegal activity, and I see the sheriff is here. So there is funding, and I think the sheriff affirmed that it's being utilized to abate illegal grows on federal property. I want to say the figure is about $25,000. Is that, I think that's what the figure is, that it is being used, and if there is a necessity to up that amount, that we make appropriate requests through our Congressman Huffman, to up those figures if there is a need there. The other issue, and I brought this to your attention, and of course, Sheila, we've had a conversation before about the fire issues. And maybe perhaps this season is going to be the exception. Every year we have a catastrophic biscuit fire kind of situation where we are bringing all kinds of people all around the state and the country in to fight these fires. And what can be done to prevent these? Do we need to do more maintenance? Do you need additional budget to do the maintenance so that fire roads actually prevent fires from jumping over? And if that's an issue which challenges the financial constraints of your department and your funding, where you end up blowing all your budget in a half a season, then you can't do your job for the rest of the season until you're refunded. That is an area that I would hope that you would look very closely at on the measures needed to prevent fires, another biscuit fire type of situation, from eventuating and then costing us, of course the risk of life is paramount, costing us a lot of money to try to maintain our forests in a way that is not going to be destructive to the budget for the remainder of the year. So that was my concern, and continues to be.
And so, like I said, Sheila's going to get into a lot of detail on what we're doing as a district to make our communities more resilient to wildfire. And the last thing I want to say is the NRA is now open on Saturdays. The Visitor Center is starting 4th of July weekend. It will be open from 8 to 2. There'll be a press release out about that soon, and we'll be doing those hours through Labor Day weekend.
Great.
So I'm going to hand it off to Michael Frederick, the FMO of the district.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you. As Jeff mentioned, I'm Mike Frederick. I'm the Fire Management Officer for the Smith River NRA and the 16,000 acres that's still part of the Gasky Ranger District. So it is a little bit of a difference on there. And if I could get the slide movement.
Your mouse.
My mouse will do it?
Yep.
Oh, sweet. Look at the control there. So what I wanted to talk about briefly is that catastrophic fire happens. This picture here is actually from the 1910 blow up in Montana. Since that time, we've been very proactive on the fire suppression side of things, in which case we've actually made it worse over the 100 years of hard fire suppression, of keeping things very small, because we haven't allowed fire to take its natural role in the ecosystem. And in this system here, you'll notice from the coast all the way to the end of the NRA, we basically have about 3 different types of ecosystems, and they have different fire return intervals that come along. On this map you can see what we call fire regime condition class, and that's basically how close is the ground to the historical fire return interval. Here you can see the NRA and the Gasky District is a fire adapted ecosystem, and there's parts of it that are actually fire dependent. Without fire, the ecosystem cannot continue to move forward with its processes. On this one, you can see the blue one is 3 times removed from the normal fire regime of about 35 years. Those lighter blue areas you can see are going to coincide with my next one, which means we're only 1 out. And if you look, you can see that that directly correlates to the fires that we've had over the last 10 or 15 years. So these fires that were had the potential to be catastrophic actually benefited the system. And as Supervisor Gitlin mentioned, a lot of times what we're looking at is how can we do that cost effectively? How can we have fire in the ecosystem, protect the values at risk that we're entrusted with, while at the same time allowing those processes to do their thing. Cost-wise, even though you look at the price tag of a large fire, actually per acre treated is a lot cheaper than we can do manually manipulating it, which doesn't mean that they don't both work hand in hand. So my point being is at some point in the next 20 years, we're going to have to continue to manage fire on the landscape. It's part of the system. We have to do it. But we have to be smart about it, and we have to use the tools that are in our toolbox to be able to do that. And I'm here today to tell you that this year is not shaping up into one that we would manage fire. We will be aggressive with all fire starts, and we will try to keep it the smallest size at the lowest cost. That's this year is shaping up to being, we don't have as many tools in the toolbox this year. And I'm pointing here to what we call the energy release component. Basically takes a lot of the science of fire and puts it into a graph that we can see. And it's basically the heat output of a fire. How quickly can it move in heavy fuels like we see a lot of. And you see that blue line, that's showing us where we are currently. That red line is the max, the driest, the hottest that it's ever seen. And the gray line is basically the average mark for us. So as you can see in this one, we're already well above average, and we're really pushing close on to historical highs in the energy release component. And that leads us to believe that we're going to have to be more aggressive with all of our starts. Now the caveat with that is the very #1 priority that we have is responder and public safety. So a single tree burning in a big burn scar in the middle of the wilderness from the fire of last year, we might let that one snag fall over and do its thing, and because there's not a big risk of it spreading outside of that fire scar. But there is a real big risk of throwing people out of airplanes who are going to get hurt while they go in to do this one single tree. So we have to do those balances between those values at risk and public and responder safety. And lastly, another indicator we use is how dry are the fuels out there. And as we know, this past winter was a little less than average, and the timing and type of precipitation that we received is basically those effects are gone. And we can see here, again, the blue line is this year, the red line is historical high, in this case lows, and the gray line is the average. So we're well above the average on these heavy fuels, and that's going to indicates to us that the ability to control these fires are going to be tougher. So we will be looking at, instead of a moderate response, that we would put a heavy response, a heavier response. That price tag of going in and one day with twice as many people instead of 3 days with half as many, we're still ahead on money-wise, but we're not going to manage one side of the fire because we think it would do good ecologically. There's just too much risk this year. But what that ties into is what can we do? You know, my business is defensive. We have to be reactive to fire. There's just no getting around it. But our defense works very well with our offense, and that's why I'll pass it on to Sheila here to talk about some of the things that we're doing proactively that both help me to have a place to stand. Again, Supervisor Gitlin was mentioning the fire roads, to give us the best chance of success while still providing for outputs. Sheila?
Mike, can I ask a question?
Oh, sure.
Sheila, this may be a question that you'll answer. There are 3 areas of concern that I'd like to bring to your attention right now. Number 1, there's money in this culling down of the forest as fuel. Now, before it literally goes up in smoke, there's a dollar incentive here when the forest is harvested and cleaned up. That there's a value that this fuel, future fuel, can be sold and offset some of these terrible costs once the fire has already happened. So that would be one question. Are you considering the value of the timber that's culled down and for opening up as an economic indicator of which way we can go? That's number 1. Number 2 is the what can the public do to assist you in this endeavor to help you do your job better? And the third point is, you mentioned that the future of the forest depends and is ecosystem connected to controlled burns. And how are these burns controlled so they don't become out of control? Are they smaller? Are they larger? Are you seeing a quantity, more smaller burns in a larger quantity of them? And tied to that, would it be helpful if you had help from Alder Camp, which this board can make outreach to, and their fire crews in helping you do your job?
Yeah.
Or in fact, level one, we're very close to getting an agreement, hopefully, with the Pelican Bay State Prison in getting level one workers out into the field and getting out in the open and helping you do your job. Are any of those as possibilities that you've considered, including those I mentioned? I threw a lot at you,
Yeah,
but
and
see if you can.
let me try to work them backwards, Roger, and then help me if I miss one. So starting with what the county and the public can do to assist us, we already have projects that include Alder Camp and would most definitely consider the Pelican Bay folks as well. A lot of what you're talking about is why I get the 29 cents an hour extra, because it's complex. Because if you're talking about post-fire salvage logging, there's a process that has to be made through after the fact, and it's very time sensitive, but of course the agency does look at those opportunities. Pre-fire, what a lot of Sheila's going to talk to you about, and since I've been here about a decade now that I've been here on this district, and Sheila and I started working together very closely very early on connecting those extraction units, those timber sale units and things, connect them by road with fuels units that we do that. And the advantage of the prescribed burns, whether they're large or whether they're small, is they're on our terms. We don't try to do them in August. We do them when the fuels conditions allow for a moderated rate of spread, but at the same time are meeting our objectives of reducing those fuels loadings. But then you tie on to that we've got certain species that don't like activity around them for a while. So that shuts that window down a little bit. We're also always dependent on the weather, whether that's reactively in fire. I'd like to say that we're all a bunch of baby-saving first responders, and we do like to think of ourselves that way. But a lot of times it's Mother Nature takes a turn, and the wind slows down or the heat lets up. And that gives us the opportunity to be able to do anything. When Mother really wants something to burn, it's going to really burn, and there's nothing that we little humans can do about it. And your first point?
I think I drew reference to you mentioned what the public can do, and again, awareness education is certainly part of about the necessity for uncontrolled burns. Smaller controlled burns and more of them.
Yeah,
larger burns, wait for a day when there's no wind. I mean, is there a protocol to your
So generally they are smaller sized when we do them, mostly just because if you don't have enough to fight them, you don't have enough to light them. So a lot of times what we'll do is there'll be smaller pieces within those other activity fuel units that are a little different, that are natural fuels, that we just are allowing fire to play a more active role in. We do have opportunities with fuel wood gathering that could be along those areas, and that's where the public can help us, is by staying within the rules of our fuel wood gathering. And a lot of times we'll open those areas up because A, it's helping our community with their fuel wood needs, but at the same time it's helping us with some of our extraction of materials from the area. Any other questions?
No. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Hi, Sheila.
Hi. So, Roger, as we go through this, I think this presentation will answer a lot of the questions too, and especially the how can the public help, because we're doing that. So the public is helping us with fuels reduction, and so I'm glad you asked that, actually. Okay, so the vegetation and fuels management objectives, community protection, restoring fire into the ecosystem, wildlife habitat improvement, botanical enhancement, watershed health, forest product development, forest health sustainability. So those are part of the missions that we're looking for when we're talking about fuels reduction in the communities. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit in the past, but I think it's important that we're all aware of it in the room here. In 2001, the communities of Gasky, Hyuchi, Rock Creek, Washington Flat, and Big Flat were all officially added to the Federal Register list of communities at risk from wildland fire. The Forest Service responded by planning several community protection projects in the wildland-urban interface. In 2005, our Del Norte Fire Safe Council received a grant to help prepare our Del Norte Community Wildfire Protection Plan. The purpose of that document was to identify and prioritize where the projects could reduce wildfire risk through implementation of hazardous fuels reduction. That CWPP was developed using a collaborative process. Local tribes, state, and federal government agencies, and fire protection districts and landowners and interested parties were involved in that. So they had public meetings in every community at risk, and they identified what the plan was for the fuels reduction. So the number one thing was they were going to implement hazardous fuels reduction on the projects, provide fire safety educational to Del Norte County, and identify the risk and mitigations to reduce threat of unwanted wildfire in Del Norte County. The CWPP states a first priority of defensibility of these communities at risk to create strategically located fuel breaks utilizing the system roads and ridge tops that you were referring to earlier, Roger. The Forest Service responded by planning new and continuing to implement several existing projects, all identified in this plan. So when we're talking about fuels treatment, the objective of these treatments is to help protect the communities from wildland fire, as well as to reduce the probability of structure fires spreading onto the national forest lands. The treatments themselves, they're strategically located. They're based on past fire history, fuel loading, topography, proximity to private lands, and historical weather patterns like Michael Frederick was referring to earlier. We have steep slopes in Gasky. They're rugged and heavily vegetated. So a lot of times it requires pre-treatment of hand piling and burning with follow-up implementation to be able to have a low intensity prescribed burn go through there. Like Michael was saying, it's important that we reintroduce fire into the ecosystem, but right now the overabundance of fuel that's out there, we're not ready to do that, so we have to pre-treat in a lot of areas. The goal is to maintain all these fuel breaks by retreating with hand piling and burning or understoring into the future. So the low intensity prescribed burning, post-treatment potential fire behavior would decrease and fire suppression effectiveness would increase. There would be less potential impacts to private property. The effectiveness of using roads for evacuation routes would be increased along with safer routes for fire suppression resources. So this is a photo of after we did the pre-treatment. So we went in, this is out at Big Flat, we went in and hand piled and burned, and then 2 years later we prescribed burned. We had a low intensity fire that we set the timing for and we set the prescription for. So we did it when it wasn't windy, when the conditions were right to be able to reintroduce fire into that ecosystem. So I'm going to roll through a lot of the projects that we have, the proactive things that we have going on in the communities up there. Elk Camp Field Break, 282 acres. It's located above the hill in Gasky. The initial treatment on that was in 1994. We retreated the whole project area in 2009. As fast as things grow on the NRA and in Del Norte County here, because the amount of moisture we get, we're needing to retreat that right now, and I'll get into that later. We actually are retreating that this year. Hyuchi Mountain Field Break, 142 acres. It's located on the ridgeline east of the town of Hyuchi. Most of that was treated in 2009, 2010, so we'll be having to maintain that into the future. Gasky Community Protection Projects. There's 6 different field breaks strategically set up on the ridge tops near Gasky. We treated it the first time in 2001, retreated the whole thing in 2009. This year we're going to be maintaining all of those 6 field breaks, and I'll get into that in a further slide. Station 3 Field Break, 176 acres, located on Low Divide Road that helps protect the Low Divide community. So this is a photo of the Gasky area itself, just to give you a picture of the fuels reduction that we have aligned strategically around the community of Gasky. oh, you can see my mouse. Okay, obviously Gasky's right here. This is the elk camp piece, and the red ones are the 6 field breaks that I talked about, Gasky Community Protection Projects. So why are we doing all this proactive stuff? This is a photo of the Panther Fire that burned through in 1996. It was 700 acres. You guys probably remember that if you lived here a long time. Fire tends to repeat itself where it's going to burn. It's not a matter of if we're going to have a fire, it's when we're going to have it. And this location right here, in 1970, the first Panther Fire burned through almost into the community of Gasky, and then again in 1996. And that's a photo of it burning. So this is the field break right here that I was referring to that we're going to maintain this year. It's called the Elk Camp Field Break. And you can see the fire scar from the 1970 and 1996 fire that burned into this field break right here and actually laid down. This field break helped protect the community of Gasky. So some of the other projects we have going on out there, one of them is the Coon Mountain project. It's a Jeffrey Pine Meadow restoration. It's 750 acres. It's located off French Hill Road. Treatment began on that in 2008 to restore the meadow habitat by thinning out the encroachment and reintroducing fire back into the ecosystem. This project area in 2015 was almost completely burned through. And the pre-treatment that we had done out there helped protect the community of Rock Creek. It was, like Mike said, it was an avenue for them to be able to suppress the fire because we had already done all that pre-treatment out there prior years. So this stuff does help. So another one of the projects that we're working on is Pappas Flat. It's an Oregon white oak restoration project. It's 21 acres. It's located off Gasky Mountain Road. It's an ongoing maintenance burn to keep that Oregon white oak stand maintained. It's highly significant tribal land in there. And after we go through and burn, they come in and collect the acorns and gather the basket weaving material so they can make baskets. There's a great opportunity for gathering materials in there. We're hoping to be able to reburn that this fall. That is the plan. And hopefully the tribes can be there when we do that. So this is the Coon Mountain project again. On the top, there's a before picture. On the bottom, there's an after picture of what it looks like after we've done the treatment out there, including the low intensity understory burn. This is 2012. We're burning Pappas Flat. So big flat vegetation and fuels management projects. These are some of the larger scale projects that we have going on. There's 3 different components in these type of projects. We have a commercial thinning opportunity. This project specifically had 408 acres of commercial thinning. There's 581 acres of timber stand improvement and 735 acres of hazardous fuels reduction. This project was identified in the CWPP that we talked about earlier. Of needing the treatment, and a lot of this project area has been complete, just so you guys know. The logging has occurred. Most of the fuels treatments have occurred on the landscape. We're at a spot now with this project where we're going to need to be maintaining this in a couple years. So this is when we were actually logging it, the implementation going on out there of the 408 acres. And this is last spring, one of the units that we were prescribed burning, low understory prescribed burning. So the Gordon Hill Vegetation and Fuels Management Project, very similar to the Big Flat project. There's a commercial thinning component out there, 665 acres. Timber stand improvement, 801 acres. There's some sugar pine restoration going on out there, 95 acres of Jeffrey Pine Meadow restoration, and 1,168 acres of fuels reduction going on out there. This project was identified in the CWPP also, and it connects all the way out to Big Flat, so it connects in with the Big Flat project. So it creates a larger scale project area for being defensible. So that's just a photo of how both those projects tie in. And we have several other projects that tie in with these two. I just wanted to give you kind of a visual of how we're working throughout the landscape to tie all these in. So this is the coolest part right here, and Roger, you brought this up. How can the community help? How can the public help? So in 2016, a joint venture between the Six Rivers National Forest, Elk Valley Rancheria, Tallawah-Dani Nation, Del Norte County, Del Norte Fire Safe Council, local and regional environmental groups, there's a whole list of those, was started, and the objective for this group was to help plan projects on the National Forest land. So the lead of that committee is Jerry Hemmingson and also Grant Werschel. And so I just wanted to show you, we planned a project together in 2017. It's called the Little Jones Creek Pilot Project. It's very similar to the Big Flat Project and the Gordon Hill Project. 385 acres of field breaks strategically located, 350 acres of commercial thinning opportunity, 90 acres of commercial firewood opportunity, and there's 11 acres of timber stand improvement. So this project, just an update on this project. So we went through the NEPA process, the project was signed, and right now they're putting the timber sale contract together for this. I think, Jeff, they said next couple weeks it could be out for the public to bid on to be able to log this. So very exciting. So another thing this Smith River Collaborative Group came together to do was obviously, you know, there's always fuels treatment that needs to be done. It's hard to keep up on up there. So we saw the need to retreat all of Gasky community protection projects. So the group got together and applied for funding through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They received funding to treat 300 acres in this important community at risk. And so the county took the lead on managing the funds to be able to have the California Conservation Crew retreat this area. The inmate crews, the Alder Camp inmate crews that you spoke of earlier, they're part of this. And also the County Roads Department is part of this. So this was a huge effort in applying for it as a group, the Smith River Collaborative, and receiving it. Tomorrow, actually, the work on the ground from the Conservation Corps will start. They will start hand piling and getting ready, preparing thinning the retreating the stands out there. So very exciting. So future planning of fuels and vegetation management projects that the group is working on. So they're currently helping plan the Kanopke South project. That's our next project area that we're planning on doing the commercial thinning in, fuels reduction in, and timber stand improvements on. And later there'll be a Kanopke North project. They're working with the Fire Safe Council to hopefully update the Fire Safe Plan. The last time that it was signed in 2005, and a lot of things have changed since 2005. We've expanded the project areas in which we're treating fuels, and that needs to be noted in there. There's been a lot of fires since then, so we need to, you know, identify those and build upon those into the future to make a landscape level project area. So hopefully they'll help with that. They're helping define the landscape level approach for restoring the effects of the ecosystem into the future. And then also, this is probably the most important thing that they're helping with, and we talked about this a minute ago, they're helping research future funding opportunities for implementation and keeping up on all the projects that we have on the National Forest. By the time we treat it, it's growing back already, so that is very important that we keep up on that. If we don't maintain it, it's not a field break. That's it.
Thank you, Sheila. Supervisor.
Excellent, very impressive report, Sheila, thank you. A couple of things on outreach. And I don't think you guys are constrained by state borders, but are you doing this outreach with what you're doing with us today with the Board of Commissioners at Curry, Josephine, and Jackson counties? Obviously, fires are contiguous. Is there an outreach interstate? That would be my first question, because B follows A. You know, if there's a fire up there, it's coming this way with the winds.
Right. So we have a number of things that address those interoperability between state, county, and local resources. We yearly have a border meeting with the Klamath, the Six Rivers, and the Siskiyou, Rogue Siskiyou, to talk about what those matters are and how do we improve the communication chain. And that's generally what we run into issues, and when the smoke's in the air and we come and talk to you in fall, it's usually to address some of these communication issues. And with Jeff here, I think we're going to see a little bit more proactiveness in this communication. And I think we'll probably see you every other meeting or so, if nothing else, just to give you an update and let you know where we're at. But as far as working across those borders, we're doing everything we can do to erase that gray line that doesn't exist. Fire doesn't see that when it comes through.
Of course. The second question, it could be for Sheila again. There's a lot of comparison between some of these blight removal projects that the community has engaged in. In our program, we have a private one because it gets refouled in a short time after we clean up an area. Right. And the same extension can be where your trees grow back. Right. So the quantity of efforts that you guys are making, it's done on a regular basis, as you just said, Sheila, it grows back in a short period of time. And is that being addressed? And again, additional funding probably, so you have all the resources available to you to keep the upper hand on this situation.
Yeah, so one of the things when the Smith River Collaborative was looking at which project area that they wanted to go after the funding for, they were looking at what needed the treatment the most. And what needed the treatment the most at the time was Gasky Community Protection Projects, because it was growing back. It had grown back. So yeah, we're definitely looking at that. We have a rotation. We have a, when you start the treatment, usually 5 years after that, you better be thinking about maintaining it because of the growth. And so we're looking at that rotation definitely, and that's where we're seeking the funding from.
And I just want to add to that because it's a good question. Sure. So one of the priorities of mine, and I talked about this last time I was here, and she mentioned it, is really looking at a landscape scale approach to our restoration efforts. And we're doing that, and there's a lot of different tools that can help us with that. And by doing that, and here's my primary goal, is I do believe that the NRA has been underutilized and it's been under the radar a little bit compared to some other districts, and that's just being really transparent. So my goal is to increase the sort of the availability of funding through increasing our profile. Our profile needs to be developed, and we do that by talking about developing landscape scale restoration efforts. And we're going to be defined as what we call a cohesive strategy forest, and so that means that's a label that we put on our projects that again increases the profile, increases the funding, because right now we don't have enough funding to do the maintenance with all the things that Sheila was talking about because of the rate of growth and that kind of thing. But we're really committed to that. I think we're going to see some changes. We'll see more funding in the next couple of years, I'd like to think.
Excellent. So any other questions for Jeff at this time? Jeff, I just want to say thank you. I felt the importance of this message that you delivered in Gasky to a very small collective group needed a lot broader presence, especially given the nature of our community and exposure to fire, particular to District 3 and District 5. Moving forward this year, I like your position, I like your aggressive approach, more importantly, Michael's message resonates well here. We haven't done enough of that in the past, and knowing Michael's on top of it gives me confidence that we're going to treat these things, especially if there's an opportunity this weekend for a lightning strike, you're going to be on it. The community doesn't want to live in smoke all summer. Obviously, we have a tourist piece of this equation that does support our economy throughout that summer period of time, and obviously fire drives that away. So the more you get on it, the more Michael's crews are there, and more importantly, the more Sheila's crews are out there making sure this preventative piece is in play, and it looks like it is. More importantly, it's being really driven forward well. I think we have a good chance to making sure these things don't continue on to the future, and we're treating it right. But I really want to thank you for your time today, and more importantly, getting this message out to the community, and please continue to come back to report to the board.
Be back as often as you want.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Supervisor.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure working with Sheila over the last few years with the collaborative. She's really been the spark plug, I think, and I just wanted to thank her. I'm looking forward to working with both Jeff and Michael in the future. I really like Jeff's commitment to going a little larger scale, in the landscape, so which I think is something that we need to do. So just a comment, don't have to answer anything, but appreciate working with you and hope to continue.
Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you.
Thank you again, guys, for spending your time with us today. All right, we're going to go forward with our next timed agenda item, which is a presentation from our cannabis working group. I believe, Jesse, you're the only person here today, so you drew the short straw. Joel's always welcome to, but he's a man of few words.
Not all the time. Morning, Jesse Davis. I'm a public member of the County Cannabis Working Group. Just here to give a very brief report, not nearly as detailed and thorough as Eric's report 2 weeks ago. Blake Alexander and Eric Gunther were not able to attend our last meeting, so we didn't do any kind of formal consensus building because we didn't have a full group. But we had some good discussions. We talked some more about manufacturing and are sticking with the idea of staying with non-volatile category of manufacturing. There's some ideas of not trying to restrict the size of these operations so much, mostly because they're generally good for the economy, sort of like out of sight, out of mind, low impact kinds of operations that create jobs. And we talked a little bit about commercial cultivation. And we had some good public comment. I thought that was probably the most worthwhile part of the meeting. I'd like to see more of that. Comment about neighborhoods, grows in neighborhoods, where they're appropriate, where they're not. Ag zone land, whether that's appropriate for commercial cannabis or not. And the types of operations that may occur in ag land or not. Sort of a leaning toward keeping it in the more remote locations. The PO land, potentially the TPZ land, in the timberland where it's away from neighborhoods. Focusing on extremely small scale, how to keep things small and still be able to be competitive, so individual farmers can be competitive while still operating on a small scale. Talked about TPZ land and the interest in wanting to or requiring official rezoning of those lands if they're going to be used for any kind of commercial operations, which would go through a lot of review process at the state level and the county level. Good discussion on water and land stewardship, which is really important. There's a lot of protections from the state level, but there's not necessarily money to enforce those rules. So we want to make sure that we here locally ensure high standards for the environment. And then just also generally, I'd like to try to encourage the public to send input to the board. These meetings during the middle of the day are difficult for anybody to attend. And so I'd like to see the community remind and encourage the public to send their input to you, to the board, and then you can send that to the working group. I'm not sure exactly how that takes place. I try to remember to encourage people at the meetings on video to do that. And then, yeah, just I added something here after the presentation from the Forest Service people. Public lands, the Delnert Groves Association is definitely, and everybody who's part of that, eager to work with local law enforcement and the Forest Service to help accomplish the goals. It's a community interest that everybody shares. That's it. Any questions? Looking for any input, direction, positive, negative for the working group?
Jesse, go back to expansion specific to TPZ versus ag land, and where the working group is trying to direct those discussions specific to commercial grows.
Okay, yeah, so ag land, I think ag land typically is properly suited for agricultural operations. Not all ag land is in the right kind of remote locations, though, that we need. So there's still a lot of discussion to be had. We're just sort of scratching the surface, so we definitely don't have any direction or consensus on that. But I think at some point, if it's not immediately, at some point the county could consider using ag zone lands for some kind of commercial operation. We don't know exactly what that would look like.
Has CDD or county council weighed in specifically with California Coastal Commission and changing specifically of ordinances in the ag lands to allow for the growth, or is it a concern or an issue at this time?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best to talk about the details of Coastal Commission stuff, but there's definitely Coastal Commission issues. It makes things, there's more process. Coastal Commission, I think right now doesn't want to see new construction and things like that. I think that there's ag land in the coastal zone as far as the county is concerned that isn't as controlled by the Coastal Commission per se, but I don't know the boundary lines and details of where the Coastal Commission has input and where they don't. But it's definitely a layer, an extra layer.
It's quite a large
consider.
layer in Delaware County.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
certainly.
And we do have our own coastal plan that we operate under.
Right.
Don't necessarily want to open back up if we don't have to.
Certainly, yeah. I think that County Council is aware of that and
Yeah.
trying to keep it as simple as possible, but Joel would probably be better to comment on that than myself.
Yeah, I can address some of that. A couple of counties have been successful in getting coastal ordinances certified by Coastal Commission, and kind of the big thing is new development. So it's Coastal Commission's pretty clear they want to see it, if it's going to be in the coastal zone, to happen in existing structures and not displace other agriculture. And so I think one of the things we got into at the last meeting, and then it would actually be really helpful if the board wanted to weigh in on this, is, you know, I had always, I think, represented pretty clearly that we had some obstacles and weren't really considering the coastal zone or really ag land. And I think probably it's worth reopening that discussion. If the board doesn't want to see it there and isn't interested in that, then the working group probably shouldn't waste its time. If the board does want to reopen those things, I think that there's maybe some room for movement that we didn't anticipate. You know, Coastal Commission actually promised some literature, some kind of follow-up on a phone call we had a while back. They actually kind of said this week, so there might be some new things happening too. So,
yeah, I'd certainly want to hear more on that specific subject. I don't necessarily want to see the county opening back up its local coastal plan if we don't have to, but at the same time, it sounds, based on your report, Jesse, that the working group right now is really steering more into the hills, the TPZ zone lands,
Sure.
as a potential venue for growing and not necessarily looking at the bottom lands.
Right, yeah, especially to start with. The idea with all of this ordinance creation with something so new is to try to keep it as simple as possible with the first round, the first incarnation of things. And when we run into things that are clearly causing complications or slowing us down, then we just drop those things, including this on ag land, maybe one of those things that we drop in the beginning for simplicity.
Sure.
So we've heard from the county, from the ag department and others saying it would be nice to see it not included, mostly from the perspective of not wanting to displace any existing agricultural operations. And then, not contrary to that, but in addition to that, I suppose, is the idea that any of these operations would be so small that they wouldn't likely interfere with existing operations, because traditional agriculture utilizes a huge amount of space generally. Cannabis not so much. So in terms of just space, it wouldn't necessarily displace existing operations. And cannabis production, in terms of flower production or resin production or oil production, that is usually better done in warmer climates anyhow. However, nursery type production operations, plant stock, that's ideally suited to coastal farm operations, especially ones that have existing agricultural buildings, equipment, they're on the grid, they have water, things like that. So they're ideally suited to commercial nurseries.
Is that greenhouse dependent or not greenhouse dependent?
Sometimes, yeah, for year-round production, greenhouse dependent for sure. So existing greenhouses on farmland that are underutilized would be perfect for that. And because it doesn't require very much space relative to other operations, dollars per square foot, you know, it tends to pencil out.
Sure. Supervisor Berkowitz.
Jesse, I watched the last several meetings of your group, and I haven't noticed anything come forward for any kind of recommendations for this group, the Board of Supervisors, to take any action on. Have you had any, or do you anticipate having some recommendations for this board for action in the next 30 days or so?
On what topic specifically?
On any of the topics, because I haven't seen anything.
Well, we finalized quite a few recommendations. I believe that the retail ordinance is in County Council's office being worked on. You guys will see that soon.
Right, but that was done several meetings ago. I'm talking about the last two meetings that I looked at. Lots of discussion, but nothing, no consensus on your group to present something to the board.
The cultivation discussion is going to take several meetings before we form any sort of consensus, I think. At our last meeting, like I said, we were missing 2 of our public members, so we don't tend to get any kind of formal consensus forming or building when we're missing people. So yeah, that's kind of the pace of things. I think it takes more than a few meetings to find consensus. But I'd say we have pretty good consensus on the manufacturing side of things, manufacturing processing licenses. They'll fit in with the structure of the retail ordinance in a lot of ways. So I think we got most of that ground covered. We'll need the next meeting with everybody present to be able to kind of finalize that. But yeah, I'd say our job probably isn't so much to drive the timetable of finalizing things. That's a little bit more county council staff and the board, but I'd say we're definitely making excellent progress. The group is unified. We have very little problem finding consensus when we're ready to do so.
Okay. Chair.
Thank you.
So,
Supervisor.
we haven't had retail before us yet, Bob. I think you're mistaking that. We've gone through with personal, and we've gone through with getting the tax. But right now, the last thing they did with consensus was retail. And that is in county councils right now, and that'll be the next thing coming to us. So, and speaking of that, having 3 come out in 6 months seems pretty, I think the timing's been really great.
Thank you.
On another issue, I guess I always just assumed we would not go down into the ag lands. I think my assumption, you're wondering about input, was always that it wouldn't be down there. So now you're saying you guys want input if we're going to, if you're going to start talking about it.
Yes, please. Thank you.
And I'm just not really sure about it. I'm not sure I ever thought that way. I guess if it was in a building, an existing building, I think I heard Joel say that would be a problem with Coastal Commission, no new building. So anything that was done would be done in a building that's already existing there. But I just don't envision pot farms as we're driving down 101 to, replacing the lilies. So that's just my input. I guess I just, in what I've been learning and meeting the heat and everything, I guess I just assumed it would be up further north, not so much down in the coastal areas. So I don't know how I feel about that. I don't want to see, my whole thing has always been, I don't want to see a bunch of tall fences.
Sure.
I know security comes into play with growing. So I wouldn't be in favor of all that.
Yeah.
If it was some type of manufacturing inside a closed building, I think I probably would feel differently about it.
Sure.
It's my put on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I don't think there's anybody who wants to suggest, there's a lot of terms that are hard to understand when people think of pot farms. That's a big, broad term that can mean a lot of different things. But typically what people think of visually, that's not what anybody's suggesting that we have here for sure. It's only that there's certain parts of the cultivation sector that are ideally suited to coastal climate. If you're producing nursery stock, like any nursery you might go to where you see thousands of little plants in little pots, that's relatively low impact. That doesn't produce a lot of smell. That's ideally suited to a temperate coastal climate where you're not fighting heat inland, where you have access to plenty of water, labor, transportation, things like that. Commercial operations that have lots of people, that have people coming to them, are not ideally suited to remote locations. It makes everything very difficult, expensive, unpermittable possibly because of their locations. So from a business standpoint, there's certain operations that are ideally suited to existing agriculture. And I think it's the idea that the scale can be so small that it wouldn't be displacing any lily fields or anything that's currently in production or could in the future be production. That's sort of something that I've been pushing for in all of these ordinances is paying attention to unreasonable real estate speculation, which drives up prices of farmland and drives up labor. And so if you're in a place like this where maybe your labor is relatively affordable and your land's relatively affordable, you don't want to see a big shift and disruption to that. And that's what has happened last year in other localities that have jumped right in and embraced the cannabis industry with full force. It's displaced a lot of existing businesses in all sectors, not just ag. So I think there's an acute awareness of that. And also, I think there's no problem, the working group doesn't have any problem with dropping the ag zoning from the recommendations, at least for the first couple of years. It's not something that, it's something that needs attention and discussion from the county to figure out if it makes sense, how it can make sense. But it's not something that needs to be decided on right away. We have plenty of time.
Thanks for that. I was hoping Joel could weigh in real quickly on the timing of the retail piece, because I know it's been completed for a while. When is it coming out of your office? When can the board expect to have that discussion?
Well, I don't want to make any promises I can't keep. It's, the ordinance is drafted. We've got a meeting Thursday to hash it out, the details with CDD. It'll probably get redrafted, and then the Planning Commission. We might bring it back here in general terms instead of the ordinance, like we did with personal cultivation, so that we don't waste our time with the Planning Commission if you hate it.
Sure.
So maybe a month.
Okay. So if we could potentially anticipate that ordinance back before us at our next meeting, potentially with the idea that you have flushed some things through with CDD, and with the idea that this could potentially go forward with the Planning Commission at their first meeting in August, is that a reasonable timeline or expectation, or am I way off base?
I think it's optimistic. I don't think it's unrealistic, but I think it's
I'm
optimistic.
sure you'll give it your best try, Joel.
We'll give it our best. Yes,
Thank you. Our public is demanding some movement, so I think we should listen to them the best we can. Thanks. Any further questions at this time on the Cannabis Working Group meeting? Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on then to item number 32, which is discussed by title 9.50.001, use of county seal of the Delaware County Administrative Policies and Procedure Manuals and direct staff as appropriate. Oh, I'm sorry, Jesse. Yes, there is, and I've left it out mistakenly. I'm going to backtrack real quick and open it up to public comment on the Cannabis Working Group presentation. Thanks for the heads up on that, Jesse.
I got a public comment on working group report.
Very good.
Jesse Davis, public member of the working group. And I just wanted to make an observation that's important for the public to hear and for the board to hear. A big part of the working group's considerations, aside from what we want personally and what staff finds legally acceptable, is we're calculating what will the board pass. We're not going to bring recommendations to the board that we know are not going to pass. That wouldn't make any sense. So it's good to have words of encouragement. We don't necessarily need specific direction in order to feel supported by the board, but just saying that you support the working group. That's sufficient in a lot of ways. And so personally, I feel that the group has had consistent support really from only 3 of the board members. The group was created with support from all 5 board members. It was a unanimous vote to create the working group. And from my observations, Supervisor Gitlin is not able to participate really in any level on policy creation other than a ban. And that's unfortunate for our group. It would be nice to be able to have some input from your viewpoint and from your constituents that we can work into the ordinances. We can't work in ban language into the ordinances. We discovered that from the very first meeting. But we can work in all kinds of other viewpoints and opinions, and would love everybody to get a little bit of what they want. So that's important, I think, for everybody to understand. Let's see. Supervisor Berkowitz, I think, has given the most significantly confusing input to the board of any board member. Supervisor Berkowitz, you recently stated that you have been disappointed for quite some time with the direction of the working group, but you didn't specify which direction you were unhappy with. Are we being too restrictive, not restrictive enough, too fast, too slow? So we really need you to clarify. I personally have been losing sleep over that. It's been several weeks, and you haven't given any kind of an indication about what that means. And it's just confusing. It's hard for the working group to know what to do with that. And we would like to have some kind of consistent support, words of encouragement, if we're going in the right direction or not. If we're not going in the right direction, we need specifics. Otherwise, we can do nothing. We have to basically just ignore your input, and we don't want to do that.
Well, let me respond to you, Jesse.
Sure.
All right, I
Are
have
you done with
looked
your
at,
public comment? Are you going to be done with your public comment?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Berkowitz.
I have looked at the tapes of the meetings. What I'm looking for is some positive direction for some of the ordinances to come before this board. You know, I've looked last couple of meetings, for example. I couldn't see any recommendations coming out of the cannabis working group for the board to take up. And I don't want to be stuck here in December looking at all of these ordinances coming before the board all at once in a take it or leave it fashion. I'd rather have you come before the board with some recommendations down the line. That's what I meant by progress with the working group. I fully support what you're doing, okay? I'm looking at the meetings, and I'm seeing a lot of input from a lot of the different members, and it looks like you're trying to move this thing forward. But I don't see any of the specific recommendations coming before the board, and that's what I'm looking for.
Okay. Yeah, not sure how to get much more specific. You guys you voted on ordinance, the tax ordinance, the personal cultivation ordinance. County Council's working on the retail ordinance. I think that's about as specific as any governing body can expect to see things to vote yes or no on. I really am, you know, I could probably beat this horse for the rest of my life, but I really am not willing to let it go. I swear your input was the most significant input that the working group has ever received from any board member, that you're disappointed with our direction. And I think that the lack of clarity that came from you on that comment was somewhat intentional. I don't think that you intended to clearly indicate to us the direction you wanted to go. I think that you were trying to make a point to the public that you were generally dissatisfied when in other venues you say that you are. And so we need consistency in order to be able to integrate the things that you would like to see into the ordinance creation.
Well, have I clarified the position?
No.
Okay. What I'm looking for is some kind of something that will come before this board. And you're looking for direction from the board to you. I don't think you're going to get that. I don't think you've gotten it. And so in absence of that, I think you're going to have to come to the board with kinds of things that you think the board will support.
Please.
Hi, Paulette Elam. Anyway, this working group, when it was first formed, it was kind of misleading. I don't think people really truly understood that by forming the working group that you were getting automatically a commercial pot. You know, that Proposition 64 gives opting out of the commercial side of the marijuana as one of your choices, but that was, in fact, for a long time, this group, it was like that wasn't even in the law. So you kind of set a trap where if somebody voted to have a working group, you turn around and say, oh, you're for commercial pot because you voted to have the working group. And yet you have to have a working group because a lot of that Proposition 64, like the 6 plants or whatever, there's a lot of details that have to be put into an ordinance. And I think you guys need to remember there are a lot of people out there that don't want commercial recreation in our county, and we feel like it's just being crammed down our throats. I want to remind you that like teenagers, they can actually become addicted to it up to, you know, it's a risk up to age 25. You know, you have people zonked out that aren't productive citizens. And there's a strong link to schizophrenia, which is a known side effect for some people. You know, marijuana is not a good thing. It's not a good product. You know, our county should be making money off of timber dollars and, you know, the money we get from the federal government because we don't, you know, have control over our timber and various things. And I understand we are actually starting to get some yield taxes, but I wish you would just get smart and keep the ban that's in place on the marijuana in place, and have the marijuana working group get the ordinances that are needed to put, you know, the personal use and all that into place, and then just disband. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Public comment.
You know, Linda Sutter, when you formed the Cannabis Working Group, it was specifically to develop ordinances. But Mr. Jesse Davis decided to use it as a political platform to make derogatory statements about Supervisor Gitlin and Supervisor Berkowitz. And first off, why Mr. Davis was even put on this board when he's not even, wasn't even a member of our county. He lives down in McKinleyville. He doesn't live 6 months plus 1 day up in those hills. And he's convicted, he was convicted of a machine gun offense back in 20 years ago. I'm waiting for our ordinances on machine guns next. So, and then when you go to these meetings, it's like watching a circus. Bunch of monkeys up there arguing amongst each other about this, that, and the other that makes absolutely no sense, has nothing to do with the ordinance. So, and then now we hear from Mr. Davis, who is vice chair, that 2 people didn't even show up for the last meeting. So how is this becoming a functional thing in our county? We're not getting anything done. Thank you.
Public comment. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
One more. There's one more.
One
and
more?
then we'll get to you, Supervisor.
Hi, I'm Robert Dorigo. Just wanted to say, thanks for your support of the working group. Reiterate the reasons we have the working group. I think we kept you guys busy for, I think, a couple hours in public comment, during the first cannabis workshop. And Proposition 64 was heavily supported and all that. Once in a while, you got to reiterate that. I'm a cannabis user. I look at cannabis as a positive. I'm also an addict, too. I'm an addict to cannabis. But I'm an addict to screen time, too. I look at that glowing screen, and I can responsibly conduct my life, raise a family. And maybe one day I'll quit using cannabis. I've considered it. I've had other drugs where I just had to quit because they were impacting my life, other addictions. I love cannabis. I can never say that for tobacco. I can never say that. I was an alcoholic for a while. I can never say that. I would cry, shaking, drink, to go grab for a couple of years where whiskey was a thing for me, but cannabis is a good product. It's here on Earth. It's been spread around for thousands of years by the Spanish and the Chinese. It's native to a very small region of the Earth. The reason we find it in South America and Southeast Asia and Africa is because the Spanish and the Chinese humans found great value in it for thousands of years and brought it with them everywhere they went. It's only the last 100 years in the United States that we've kind of had to remember, our use of the plant. The first draft of the Constitution was printed on hemp. I just want to read the confusion. I think for Mr. Berkowitz, I think Jesse was confused also because I think you'd cited a dissatisfaction of a cannabis work group member, Blake Alexander. I think you had met at a women's Republican meeting. Maybe I'm mistaken here. I think that's what you'd cited. And so you'd cited Blake, and we were confused because we talked to Blake, and Blake kind of was confused, and we talked to him about it. And so I think that's where we're like a little confused, just trying to figure out what, we feel like we're on a unified board with the cannabis work group, and we appreciate your support. This could really, the commercial aspects really can't help our economy. We have such a small economy that really a couple potato chips actually end up going around a little bit. It's just a $300 million economy up here, so it doesn't take a whole lot to kind of show up on our radar and to offer a few jobs and to see a little bit of positive change in people's lives economically. And you know, I have children, and they know I use cannabis, and they know I don't want them to use cannabis. I kind of know maybe one day they'll probably try it, like somebody tries champagne, you know. You know, I want my community to still accept me, you know, to still accept me as a decent member of my community, you know. And thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Public comment.
Hello, Aaron Skrback. I'd just like to say thank you for supporting the working group. As you know, the majority of Del Norte County voters did vote in favor of this, and we still want this. We're watching, we are observing everything that is going on, and as you all know, we will make this public, and there is no hiding from anything that is going on in this county. So we are watching as to what's going on, and we continue to support the working group, and hopefully the ordinance will come out in a timely manner and be to the majority of people's likings. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment? Okay, Supervisor Gitlin.
I have something to say to each of you individually, and I'll start with you, Jesse. If I've been unconfusing you or confusing you by my position on marijuana, and I will call it that instead of cannabis. Excuse me, I'm talking. Please, you had your opportunity, now it's my opportunity to speak. If I have confused you, let me unconfuse you by telling you my opposition to this problematic product, commercial marijuana in Del Norte County. Yes, I voted for the committee, and that's when it had a working member and his family in opposition to the marketing and growing of this product in Del Norte County, Mr. Blake Alexander. And he has been AWOL. I haven't seen him, I haven't heard from him. I think he's thrown in the towel. And each of his children came up here and said to me, there's a significant amount of population of this county, probably, I don't know what that number is, we're going to find out, but it's about half of the community who sees problems with this product. Now, with all due respect to you, Mr. Davis, you're a grower. You're not this objective, excuse me, okay.
Jesse.
I would appreciate uninterrupted. No one's going to hear you from down there. You'll have an opportunity if the chairman chooses. But let's get to the point here. The point is, your objectivity is highly suspect. Now, you just heard Ms. Einem, thank you very much for calling and bringing it up to the attention that a lot of this community does not want this rammed down their throat. There are problems with this product and its commercial implementation of marijuana, and we don't want it. And I'm one of those who don't want it. I'm going to continue. And Mr. Skrback, please make my positions publicly clear in any way which you can. Make it clear of my opposition to this product. And again, I appreciate your comments also, Ms. Sutter, with bringing this to the attention that there is a not balanced working group, marijuana working group, whatever you want to call it. There's an unbalance there. Everyone thinks the same. No, you're not going to have 5 people in agreement on this. Supervisor Berkowitz and I actually are disagreeing on this product. So you've got 4, but you won't get 5. And I'll stand tall and firm and proud to oppose this product in Del Norte County now, today, tomorrow, and for all I can see, forever. I don't see that it has a place. And as far as it doing, Mr. Dorigo, you say it can do a lot of help in this county. It can do a lot of harm in this county also to those people who become addicted to this product, especially our young people. And for you to willy-nilly say, I'm going to discourage my kids from using this, but you know, they may try it like champagne. Big difference. Champagne and marijuana are 2 entirely different products. And until and when and if the federal government gets on board with this, it is a class 1 drug. It is banned by the federal government. And until and when and if that changes, until and when and if that changes, you have the cart before the horse. You're going the wrong way. Now, I hope I've made myself clear on my position on this product today, tomorrow, and forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You know, I'm sorry members of the public have to go through some retaliation, so to speak, from individual supervisors that shouldn't happen from this dais. As a board, we do operate under a code of ethics that is outlined by the Fair Political Practices Commission, and it's AB 1234 if you want to look it up. I've made some statements to that point in the past that AB 1234 really, when we're elected to office, we're to come to a position of an unbiased approach to the public. So we don't take a stand on either side. We could kind of let our positions kind of be known, but when we haven't even made a decision yet as a board, specifically on one item, whether it's an ordinance or a new policy, the public needs to know that we have an open mind when we're approaching these issues. And in this case in particular, at least what we're seeing now is a closed mind. And that could either be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. But right now, as we operate under AB 1234, it's considered a bad thing. It's a biased approach. It's one that, in my opinion, based on reading AB 1234, sets us up for liability in this county. Now, a supervisor may or may want to approach and consider reading that in the future, but in my opinion, we are going to keep, as a board, an open mind. More importantly, we're going to support the working group. We all voted unanimously to place and work together to come back with some movement and ordinances before us. And hopefully we'll do that in due course and achieve those goals we all set in motion last year in 2017. Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead
Mr.
and
Chairman,
move forward.
That implies a retort. You spoke
actually,
and you did your thing, and I'd like to respond to AB 1234. You're sorry?
I'm sorry. We're going to move.
AB 1234.
I'm sorry. We're going to move forward with item number 32.
He's going to have his way because he'll shut my mic off. The bottom line is this.
I'm going to move forward with item number 32.
Can
you shut Mr. Gitlin's mic off?
I can tell you, we had an
Can
opportunity
you go ahead and shut Mr. Gitlin? All right, we're going to go ahead and come back. Item number 32, which is discuss 9.50.001, use of county seal of the Delaware County Administrative Policy and Procedures Manual, and direct staff as appropriate. Jake, do you mind going ahead and reading the policy? No worries. Take your time. Jay, I'll go ahead and read it. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Very good.
So, Title IX, General Operating, 9.50, use of county seal. Policy, all requests for use of the county seal must be submitted to the clerk of the Board of Supervisors. B, county departments may request the use of the county seal by submitting the request to the clerk of the board. The clerk will then submit the request to the county administrative officer, assistant county administrative officer, or the personnel manager for approval. Once approved, the request is sent to information technology. C, outside departments requesting use of the county seal also need to submit the request to the clerk of the board. However, this request needs to go before the Board of Supervisors for approval. If the board approves, the request is forwarded to information technology.
Thank you, Jay. So recently, I've had communications with many members of the public that have, through social media, seen a letter that was disseminated to Western Communications by Supervisor Gitlin, where he's basically asked for either the termination or resignation of an individual with a donor triplicate, Mr. Robin Fornoff. In that letter, there's the use of the county seal. It hasn't been the first time, and it's been brought to our attention in the past of this use. I'm not sure if the supervisor has had discussion with county council or CAO specific to this policy, but in bringing the policy back before the board, it's a reminder that we do have a policy here in place about its use. And more importantly, I would like to address the issue that was brought up to Western Communications from Supervisor Gitlin in respect to utilizing the county seal, which basically, when that is done, it's speaking as one, not as an individual, but as one, Delaware County Board of Supervisors. And we move forward as one, whether there's a pro decision or a con decision one way or another. The decisions of this board are hatched out by the board before we move forward on a policy decision or direction to staff. But it's hatched out by the board here in this dais in a transparent manner. So when the use of the county seal takes place, and in this case, to lobby Western Communications for the removal of a staff member that may or may not have taken an approach specific to his job on reporting a story, that's not this board's business. That's the business of that private entity. But to represent the Delaware County Board of Supervisors as one individual with our county seal, that opens us up and exposes us. And so this issue does need to be discussed, and more importantly, we need to have a firm commitment from our supervisors about the use of this policy, and more importantly about the use of our seal. And the policy has been put in place for a reason, so we ensure that we speak as one voice when a decision is made here at the dais. And so at that point in time, I'd like to open this up for discussion, and if there's any direction to staff, go ahead and take that. Supervisor Berkowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jay, I wonder if you might want to address something, considering a couple of us are fairly new on the board. What is the permissible use of the seal, and what have previous boards approved for the use of this seal?
Well, previous boards have approved this policy. The standard operating procedure for the use of the seal was on letterhead of the Board of Supervisors or for individual supervisors representing their district. That action is like I say, standard practice. That's what's happened in the past.
So let me get this straight. If a supervisor from 5th District wants to communicate with his constituents, would that be reasonable use of the seal?
It's the reasonable use of the letterhead which has the seal on it, yes. That is what it's supplied to each one of the supervisors. You have letterhead.
So if somebody wants to communicate with somebody who's outside of his district, would that be permissible use?
It's permissible to use your letterhead to represent yourself as a supervisor, or for the seal to be used as the Board of Supervisors with a decision made by the supervisors. So if you're asking, can you write a letter to somebody? Yes.
Okay.
But clarification on that, Jay, but it has to be approved by the board when you use it, correct?
In the past, the standard practice has been to provide letterhead to each one of the supervisors, and it does have the county seal on it. So it has your name as a district supervisor, and it has the seal on it. That's provided regularly.
I'm not following.
She's unclear.
As to what?
You can't send out, we can't send any letter to anybody without it being approved, correct?
No, you can. As a district supervisor, you can send a letter to correspond with others. You cannot send a letter that is contrary to the board decision and represent the Board of Supervisors.
Okay.
You can represent the minority opinion, and we're talking specifically to decisions of the board. I'm not talking to the letter that Supervisor Gitlin penned. That is not what I'm giving you an opinion on here. The standard practice has been you can write letters to your constituents, you can write letters to others, but as representing the Board of Supervisors, you cannot do that.
Yeah.
And how is that representation revealed? In other words, you might want to say, and according to all the members of the Board of Supervisors, we believe this. That would probably not be permissible, correct?
If you represent the entire board, then you're misrepresenting it.
But if you're saying on your letter, for example, I believe this, and you're signing it as, let's say in my case, Bob Berkowitz, 5th District Supervisor, that would be okay.
That has been permissible in the past. When you correspond with others, yes. But when you start to move over into a decision of the board or represent the opinion of the board, then the answer is no.
Then you wouldn't want to do that.
And the letter we're discussing that was brought up was not the response of the board. It wasn't an opinion. It wasn't a communications. It wasn't a correspondence. It was...
It looks like this was the feeling of one board member writing as that one board member.
No.
No?
I don't think so. I mean, it wasn't the letterhead that he was supplied. It was him taking a logo and putting a seal on something different. Am I correct? That wasn't letterhead he was supplied. It was letterhead that was made up, that he took the county seal and put on his own letterhead, and then made I just don't think it was appropriate. And I personally felt like he was representing the board.
Well, I haven't seen the letter, so...
Oh, how could you not? Bob, it was all over Facebook. And
sorry, I did not see the letter. All right. And if he put the logo, the county logo on it, and it was a letter addressed to a person, it looks like that, and expressing his feelings, it looked like that was his feelings, and it was permissible under the rules.
So, and let me back up the point of the conversation and use of the county seal, and I used the word specifically exposure.
Quiet, please.
Supervisor?
Please be quiet.
Supervisor?
No, we have this supervisor. You want me to be quiet? Cowan, be quiet. Now, don't talk to me while he's talking as if no one's hearing you.
Supervisor, thank you. So if I could back up the conversation a little to my opening statement, and the policy, and more specifically why we have a policy in place. And I did use the word specifically exposure. And I've had some discussion with county council on this. I know Liz is not here today. Joel's here in her place. You know, we do take positions as a board, and we do take those positions collectively. Sometimes it comes out 2-3, sometimes it comes out 5-0. Either way, once a position's taken, and we put our materials on letterhead and send out those positions either to a letter to our legislature, a letter to Congress, or a letter to the locals, that seal is used in those letters. This was a letter from an individual. And because of that county seal on there, based on what I'm seeing, it exposes the county to litigation. Clear, plain and simple. It's asking for the resignation of an individual that works for a private company. Joel, I don't know if Liz prepped you on this or not. I wouldn't mind at this point, if you're not prepared to make a comment on this, fine. If you are, if you could weigh in on that, that'd be great.
I'll make a limited weigh in here. I think that there's two separate issues. One is, how does the board want to control its communications and its relationships with the public? And maybe a little bit more beefed up policy that specifically says when a supervisor uses a seal might help that. But when it comes to liability, and I'm not going to comment on the letter, I saw it briefly on Jay's phone. I could hardly read it on mine. But, you know, the board member's ability to expose the county to litigation is really independent of whether you use the seal. If you are serving a function, if you're out there in the community, if you're talking to people, if you're in public, if you're sending letters, and you do anything that's defamatory, it exposes us to liability whether or not you use the seal. So I don't want the board to think that a policy that says you can't use the seal is going to protect the county. It is actually just incumbent on the members to consider the county's liability and the fact that the county does have a duty to indemnify its supervisors and provide a defense at the county's expense. So there's, you know, the issue of the seal is something for the board politically to deal with. The exposure to litigation is something kind of independent of that.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. So, you know, without having Liz's input at this time, I think the importance of providing some clarity to those policies is needed. With the fact that it'll allow us to discuss as a board, more importantly, and kind of go into the weeds if need be, the use of that seal. Whether that seal is used or not, it's apparent the actions of an individual member of the board representing the board, seal or no seal, could potentially expose us to liability. So thank you for that clarification, Joel. At this point in time, I'd like to open it up for public comment.
So, Linda said. So Mr. Gitlin wrote a letter, and I didn't read the letter, so I don't know what the letter said. But it seemed here that you guys, 3 of you, want to make the rest of the board uphold certain rules, but you yourself, Mr. Howard, don't even uphold rules and policies. So before you start pointing fingers at each other, y'all need to be on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment?
All I have to say is I think the laws, this SB 1234 and some of the rules puts muzzles on all of you. I don't like this. At the federal level, if you want to know how somebody's going to vote on something, people poll and they call and ask them and they get an answer. And our local politicians are just muzzled. You can't say anything or do anything, and you know, it's just kind of sad. Anyway.
Thank you. Other public comment at this time? Okay, we're going to go ahead and bring. If there's any other public comment, please be ready. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert, and I saw the post, and you know, to me it went over the line. You know, I don't, especially as an elected person. You know, I think probably the journalist should be out of reach. You know, they did end up posting that story. the day you posted that, I just heard about it on the radio. So I think you jumped the gun, and even if they didn't post it, I think it was inappropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment?
Aaron Skroback. What an embarrassment. Why put the county seal on something that limits the First Amendment? You know, free speech and the freedom of the press is the First Amendment. Why do that? Stop being an embarrassment to this community, Roger. You're an embarrassment.
Okay, other public comment at this time? Okay, we're going to go ahead and bring it back to the board. I'm not sure if there's further discussion from board members, but I'd like to have some consideration at this time, kind of revisiting this policy and maybe kind of diving down into the weeds on specific use. And more importantly, if that use comes up with the county seal in the future, where if there's a letter that's derogatory or potentially exposes this county to some form of litigation, that we have some consequences for it. And I'm not sure if there's a want or a will to do that, but I'd like to direct staff to do so.
I agree with you. And Jay, again, I might be going in a different direction on this, but it's also come up when Supervisor Berkowitz went on TV representing Del Norte County Supervisor 5 as a cannabis expert. So, you know, I'm just wondering, when we go out into the public as representatives of the board, is that something that, you know, we all need to discuss, or is that something that any of us can just go out and, you know, I'm this and I'm going to make those decisions, or I'm representing the county? I just feel that, I feel it's wrong for an individual to take their opinions and go out saying I'm representing the county. So where does that come into play with this as well?
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Please, Supervisor.
I can't believe that you're thinking that an appearance on TV where I was invited to be there just as a member of the 5th District in Del Norte County, and even it had it on the crawl, 5th District Supervisor, thinking that I was speaking for the entire board. I don't know where you get off on doing that. So let me be clear, unless you want to speak, go ahead, Lori. You can speak. I'm going to be quiet because you must have the floor, even though I got it from the chairman. But that's all right. You can ignore the rules.
Thank you. You just said it. It's scrolled. Del Norte County Supervisor Bob Berkowitz, cannabis expert.
District. 5th District.
I'm just asking. I'm asking if he's looking into something.
This is about me.
Please, Supervisor.
Okay, without interruption, thank you, Supervisor Cowan. You know what? Be careful what I just told you about those 5-0 folks. This is what this man wants. He wants 5-0. He wants contrition from Supervisors Berkowitz and myself. Now, there was nothing in that letter that said I represented the Board of Supervisors in this pronouncement. I could put a disclaimer. I speak only for myself. I'd be happy to do that. I've been using that letter for 6+ years. No one said anything until today. And now we're here talking about lawsuits. So what are the damages on lawsuits? It's never happened. Oh, the editor is defamed? Well, let him invite me on, which I'm banned from his newspaper. He doesn't want to let me write a letter to the editor. Let him invite me on. Let him here, Gitlin, write something unedited. So we have this I hear Mr. Skroback talking about free speech on one hand, but not for you, Gitlin, you're an embarrassment. Well, let me tell you, sir, even if you feel I'm being embarrassed, Mr. Skroback, I have free speech. I actually have free speech. And you guys are treading on very dangerous water if you try to quell my free speech. My picture's on there, the letterhead. District 1 is on there. It's as clear as can be. I see it as, you don't want me to, I can absolutely remove the seal and send that same letter or another letter similar to it. And I don't speak for any of you except me. No, Mr. Chairman, you will not control me on this. You're abridging my free speech, and you can't do that.
Thank you. So maybe at this point in time we could consider potentially two things, because the communication I did receive from Western Communications and their representatives, it was taken as the letter came from the Board of Supervisors. So I'd actually like, at this point in time, the board to consider two things. One, that the position as Supervisor Gitlin, with that communication, the request for resignation, was not a position of the board, and it could be simply one paragraph stating that. And then number two, for us to direct staff to dive into the weeds, so to speak, on policy using the seal with potential repercussions if the seal is used in the future outside of those policies. If I don't think we're going to have consensus, I'd love to have a motion if a motion is going to be made.
I'll make a motion to give staff direction. A motion to have staff go into policy number 9.50, use of the county seal, getting more clarity on that and bringing it back to us.
I'd also like to know if your motion contains a letter to Western Communications.
A letter to Western Communications letting them know that that was the actions of one supervisor and the opinions of only one supervisor, possibly two, I don't know, and that that was not the general consensus of the board.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to break that out. She's utilizing two different subjects. If she wants to break it out into separate subjects, we might want to have a discussion on that.
That sounds good. I appreciate that. Thank you, Supervisor. Sorry, Supervisor Cowan, are you willing to make your motion a two separate agenda, or two separate discussion items?
I'll make a motion on the two different items. One would being the letter, and two being diving into the general operations, Title 9, 9.50, use of county.
Okay, so let's take your first motion to see if there's a second, which would be to write a letter to Western Communications that the actions of one individual on the Board of Supervisors didn't represent the actions of a whole. Joel?
You know, it's not necessarily problematic to tell staff to write a short letter and staff writes the letter. But it might be helpful, especially in a situation where we're talking about what the board does or does not stand for, that the letter come back and be voted on.
Okay.
Just to be clear about what the motion is. If you want to just send it, we can send it. If you want it to come back and the language can be vetted and voted on and discussed,
I'm
whichever
certainly willing.
Direct staff to write a letter and bring it back.
Okay. So we have a motion on the table, direct staff, and bring it back to the board at our next meeting. Do we have a second on that motion?
Sure, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Kylie, can you please pull the vote?
Supervisor Berkowitz?
No.
Supervisor Gitlin?
No.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. Okay, the second part of your motion, Supervisor, is to, let's just for clarity for Jay, is to revisit Title 9.5.001, use of the county seal. Correct?
Yes, that was correct.
Jay?
So in looking at this for some clarity, would it be the consensus of the board or the direction of the board to place this so that the use of the seal is determined strictly by the Board of Supervisors, or to look at it similar to what's written in there where it goes to the county administrative office?
Yeah, to the point, and if you're already going through the exercise, which we discussed on item 31, if you are visiting other counties' websites at that time or title and specific policy, if there's something in there that you can mimic and bring in, great. If not, if it's something that county council needs to take a broader look at, then fine. But
okay.
Supervisor Hemmingson.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a slippery slope we're going down, when we start making policy because of individual personalities. This policy has served us well for many, many years, and because maybe it's being taken advantage of or something. I think it's about representation, who you're representing, and I think clearly that needs to be stated on who you're representing. If you're using the county seal on your letterhead, and you're writing a personal letter that you are representing yourself or your constituents, I guess, and in this particular case, I haven't read the letter, I haven't seen the letter, so I don't really know, but in this particular case, if he was representing the constituents of his district and signed that as District 1 supervisor, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I guess the question would be asked, was he representing the constituents of his district? So I think when you sign it as a representative of your district, that's what you're putting out there. If you're putting it out there that you're representing the board, that's a whole different issue. So you know, communications is another thing. You know, as long as you're saying who you are and what the letter's representing, I don't have a problem with the policy the way it is.
I'm going to go ahead and second Supervisor Cowan's motion so we can further discussion, because I think Supervisor Berkowitz wants to make a
Well,
statement.
I agree with Supervisor Hemmingson. We're setting limits where we really don't need to set any limits. Mr. Chairman, I sure wish you would have given us 5 copies of that letter so we could take a look for ourselves and see, was he representing himself or was he representing the Board of Supervisors? That would have clarified this whole thing immediately. But that wasn't done, and I agree with Supervisor Hemmingson. You know, you've got one instance that maybe could be a violation. Out of everything in what, 50 years? And you want to change a policy based upon that? I don't think that's prudent.
Okay. Thank you. Further discussion? All right. Very good. Kylie, go ahead and pull the vote. I don't think we have consensus.
What's the issue? What's the motion?
The motion was basically to direct staff to look into the policy and even look at what other people are doing. To me, it's very vague. I think I just want more clarification. We're not talking about changing it. We're talking about looking into and seeing what other people are doing. I just don't think it's clarified. I think when you take a seal and you put it on, he's talking about letterhead that you're given from the office. That's not what Mr. Gitlin did. He took the seal and he put it on something totally different. So I want to know if that, you know, that's where I'm wondering. That doesn't seem right. So, and maybe it is. This is very vague.
And I happen to agree with that, and that's why I wanted this item on the agenda. And so it's here.
Yeah,
and I know Supervisor Hemmingson, you disagree with that. You believe it goes down a slippery slope, but I guess we're in a position to vote on it now to see if that motion moves forward.
Well, I just think you're narrowing limitations. I think in this particular case, if I'm hearing what I think the letter represents, even if he signed the letter as district whatever supervisor, that he's writing that letter in support of that district, and that district feels that way about whatever he's writing about. So that concerns me also, but you know, I just don't think we need to go there.
Okay, very good. Kylie, please pull the vote.
Supervisor Gitlin?
No.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
No.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
No.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on with legislative and budget issues at this time, where we consider miscellaneous legislative and budget matters pertinent to the County of Del Norte. Authorize the chair to sign and send appropriate letters with respect to matters pending before the state or federal governments. Jay?
There are no new letters before you today in regards to legislation, although there are a couple of things being followed. There's legislation in regards to orientation requirements for IHSS that could have an impact, although they are limited and they're already in place for other unions. SB 872 is a prohibition on taxes on groceries. I'm not sure that that's going to be a huge issue for the Board of Supervisors, but it is something that's out there. Regarding the budget, the Board of Supervisors passed the interim spending plan at the last meeting, at the public meeting, and we're waiting for the auditor controller, who will then close the books on 17-18, and tell us where we are in regards to our fund balance, which we would then apply to 18-19, which is the existing budget. And I did send an email to all of the board members in regards to a back payment that was made by the Department of the Interior. It was received by the Auditor Controller about a week ago in regards to PILT. It was an additional $500,000 plus, and I want to clarify that's realized in last year's budget. That came in before July 1st, so it's realized in the 17-18 budget. It isn't a pot of money that is available in 18-19. So just to clarify that, because there have been some calls in regards to the use of that funding, and the Board of Supervisors has the ultimate say over all of the use. But just so you understand that that came into the auditor's office, and he books that into that budget year. We'll address as we go through the process. We're 2.6 million in deficit as of today, just like it was at the last meeting. When he closes out, we'll start making those, having those meetings, and we'll have a meeting of the board, a workshop, if you may, to talk about priorities and go through that process that we went through last year. But I think that needed clarification.
Thank you, Jay. All right, let's go ahead and move on with item number 36, which is approve and authorize the chair to sign the attached letter of support for SB 930, financial institutions, cannabis, and direct the letter to be forwarded to the committees on business and professions, bill proponent and Senator McGuire and Assemblyman Wood as requested by County Administrative Officer. Jay?
To clarify, that was Supervisor Berkowitz that made that request. Somehow my name got on there, but I would like to clarify that portion of it.
Supervisor?
I think I made it clear, that we need to get rid of this cannabis situation as a cash business. They need to be able to have all of the advantages that all of the rest of us have of being able to utilize the banking system. And without that, being a cash business makes a very poor business in that not only are you open to burglary and robbery, but even the inconvenience of being able to pay your taxes without going down to Sacramento. So that's the reason for this. I'm not sure whether I can make one amendment on this. Last meeting, we wanted it forwarded to the Committee on Business and Professions, which I'm pretty sure it's already passed by the Committee on Businesses and Professions, and now it's in the Appropriations Committee. And if we could modify that to be the Appropriations Committee, I think that would be appropriate.
Yeah, we can certainly add that to that. It was in Business and Professions the last time. It had gone through Appropriations, and then it was, I believe it was sent to Business and Professions, and it's been passed, I believe, at this point. One other note, and it's in the report. After the last meeting, I was approached by the Treasurer Tax Collector, and she apologized for not being here today because she's very short-handed in her office. But she did want to note that her office is going to have some complications. While she didn't, there was no issue with this, but because of the FDIC insured bank, she's going to have difficulty taking any type of checks or having interactions with those banks for our treasury. So although this would assist the industry, that will be a complication that she's going to have to deal with, and the counties throughout the state will have to deal with until there's a correction to that.
So you're saying that we wouldn't take a check if it was drawn on one of these banks? Is that what she's saying?
That was the explanation, yes, that she cannot take a check.
Even though it specifically says within the bill, local governments can take these?
Charter banks is what she relayed to me, that is still an issue with FDIC.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, that makes it pretty much useless.
Well, I don't know that it makes it useless inside the industry, but in dealing with paying your taxes and interactions with permits and those types of things, that it's not going to correct that at this point.
How's that enforced? Let's say this passes the California legislature, governor signs it into law. How's it enforced?
I do not know. I don't know how they're going to deal with that at this point. We've had a few of these things where there's some conflicts, but you know, I know there are going to be limitations on the treasurer, tax collectors, and those agencies. So if they establish that it's part of the cannabis industry and a cannabis charter bank, then their obligations are their responsibilities that under the law currently, but I don't know, there's a conflict there.
On a curiosity note, and Joel, you're probably paying more close attention to this than I am. How are Washington, Colorado, Oregon dealing with this? Or are they still operating under a cash business?
They're doing things like this. I haven't looked recently, but it's been small banks, charter banks, credit unions with some limited protections, and then there's some, I can't remember exactly how it works, but there's some kind of qualified immunity type things built into some of that FDIC stuff. I haven't looked at it recently.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Sorry to put you on the spot. I was just curious. Hi, Barbara. How are you? You have the floor.
Sorry, I ran down here. So the problem with it is that those state charter banks, you cannot do business with federal insured, federal national banks at all. So those, I don't have the paperwork with me, but those checks that they're talking about, we can't negotiate. No treasurer in the state of California can negotiate those checks, so we can't accept them. I'm not sure why it was written that way. And our association, the Treasurers Association, is not going to follow with it. We have no interest in it. It doesn't fix the problem. So cash only with our county.
Supervisor.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's basically above our pay grade. I think that we're going to either have the state to work it out with the federal government or them to come in with some federal legislation. I think there are enough states now that are in the same position that we're in that they're going to be doing something about it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you based on what Joel's saying. There's a little bit of sounds like immunity in place for those states that proceeded that way. We'll see how this all washes out. Barbara, I don't know if you've got a gut feeling on this or not from your association.
Well, I don't know the reason for wanting to side with it, or I just feel like it's not going to benefit the county at all, and I wonder how the cannabis industry is even going to be able to use these checks. It talks about paying lease payments and paying vendors. The only way they're ever going to negotiate those checks with those individuals is if they also have a state charter bank account. So if no state charter bank accounts are created, then it's null and void.
So your position then is to actually stay moot on this issue?
I would.
Okay.
I just don't see, it's not quite there yet. From my understanding, I'm the chair of our cannabis committee through the association, spoke with the author, and it was a little premature. I don't think that the state has any plans of creating a bank for them to help accept, payments through these negotiate paper. And I also feel like they acknowledge that it's not probably going to work, but they're just trying to figure it out. I can forward an email that was sent to me with some of the comments that were made by the author and a couple of the representatives, if you'd like to see that before you send it. I don't know.
Is Karen's gut feeling that is this going to potentially die in committee because there is potentially not a well thought out piece of legislation here, or what's?
I think the general consensus is this was moving pretty quickly and was going to get passed and go to the governor. That's
Okay.
that's where it's been, and that's the track it's on.
Interesting. So this is an interesting predicament. We find our county tax collector saying, not so good, and
we can't utilize it at all. We can't. The government code doesn't allow us to open an account under the county's name, that state charter bank. Let's say there was one in Sacramento, I couldn't go to that bank and create an account under the county and then accept payments maybe through like a transfer. that's laundering. That's a charter bank. I can't do that.
Understood.
And it's sort of the same with the state. They can't open a bank account. And this is all what I'm hearing from the higher, level, the LA County, the Merced County treasurers. They all agree that it's not going to work.
Well, I think that's a reasonable concern to present,
Yeah.
and I'm glad you rushed down
Yeah,
the hall
sorry.
to present that
We're
opinion
short-handed today.
to the board, because I do think it weighs into our decision-making process today.
I mean, it depends what you guys want to acknowledge, just that it's working and we're, trying to work towards a resolution, but since the county can't utilize it, I don't know if that's something that you guys want to send a letter up for, so.
Supervisor Gitlin.
I'm not sure if this microphone is working, so I'll try it one more time. At our meeting last, our board voted 4-1, and the exact arguments that you're bringing up today, Barbara, are the same ones I brought up before about the FDIC, the RICO problems, all of these issues. This is way putting the cart before the horse. Our Senate has already voted 29-5 in favor of this. Now we're hitting a glitch. It's interesting that it comes up here because apparently this thing wasn't working last time when I said the exact same things that you said today. Now suddenly there's a great awakening. It's very telling when we get into these situations how when someone is marginalized as the one against the four, it's like, let's follow Sacramento. Well, Sacramento is wrong on this one, and you're bringing this to their attention. We have the cart before the horse. The federal government must be on board with this, and until and when and if, and that may never happen, this whole discussion on transactions, the Transparency Act, I thought it was called the Marijuana Transparency Act, cannot happen. The Assembly, this letter is going to go to the Assembly. For what reason, I do not know if it's passed, but we already voted 4-1. Now we're going to do something else today because of something you brought to the attention of this board as a result of my saying something 2 weeks ago at a previous meeting. It's very disconcerting when you have this kind of this marginalization where we won't listen to Supervisor Gitlin. Whenever he says it's no, it's no, it's no. And now, thank you, Barbara, for coming up and bringing some enlightenment to the situation.
Supervisor Gitlin, I think, has a crystal ball. He knows how we're going to vote today, but I'm not sure if that's the case or not, and unfortunately his mic was not cut. But go ahead.
Well, I don't know that it can do any harm. Maybe it sends a message that the federal government needs to get off of their tail and do something, but just because we can't use it, maybe they can use it. Maybe it's like script, you'll be like the company store. You'll only be able to spend it at the company store.
We talked about all different options, how we would be able to utilize the option. I mean, it's we're just trying different things. The Treasury, the county treasurers do want something in place. We are taking a lot of cash, and it's concerning, and we would love to see changes, but after vetting all of our issues, we just couldn't be on board with it.
Supervisor Cowan?
I kind of agree with Hemmingson. I just feel like, you can't be taking in all this cash. This has been a conversation for the last couple of years since I've been in these conversations, is the cash is dangerous, and we kind of find a solution. And it doesn't sound like this is the perfect solution, but it sounds like a stepping stone going in that direction. And even though it sounds like it's not going to help us at all, will it help other counties or other areas of California that may then kind of domino effect, do you think, at all? Or is it just no way, no county?
Yeah, no county treasurer. I mean, we're all under the same government code. We can't open a bank account with this charter bank. That's against government code. And we can't accept those checks or whatever negotiated paper. We can't negotiate that with any of our banking institutions. So no county can make use of this at all.
I would love to see that reply that you
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a little bit of an eye-opener, but I'd be happy to forward it on to you. You're welcome.
I don't think it necessarily puts us in a bad light.
No, not at all, but I just wanted you to be aware.
We want something to happen.
Yeah.
And that's what we're after.
Right.
Supervisor Berkowitz.
Well, the lightning bolt has struck because twice in this meeting I have agreed with Supervisor Hemmingson. Unbelievable. I agree with Supervisor Hemmingson and Supervisor Cowan. What harm can it do it may be able to get federal government off the dime and do something about that. So I think, what harm does it do? Absolutely nothing.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you, Barbara.
You're welcome.
Appreciate your time today. Okay, let's go ahead and open it up for public comment.
Hi, I'm Robert Dorigo, and I'd like to thank Supervisor Berkowitz for bringing this forward. And this is, you know, the kind of thing I'd always hoped to see, you know, as stretching out a little bit. I know Mr. Gitlin thinks of the cart before the horse, but that's what this country is. You know, we build the cart before we can afford the horse. You know, it's called dreaming. It's the American dream, and I agree with you. There's a, you know, there's a hair that it's going to break the camel's back. This isn't going to be it, probably. You know, it might be useless, but it is an expression of will. And it's not going to cost us a dime more than it's cost us so far. And so I'd like to see the letter sent in support of people participating in the cannabis industry and our ability to, you know, safely handle the revenue that comes in through these things and be respected as just another member of our community. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Public comment? Okay, we're going to go ahead and bring it back to the board. Is there a motion at this time?
I'd like to make a motion that we send a letter supporting SB 930.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the table. Kylie, please pull the vote.
Supervisor Cowan?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
No.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Chair Howard?
Yes. All right, let's go ahead and move on with item number 37, which is receive other brief reports and announcements relative to the County of Del Norte and projects. 2x2 committees, goal committees, and board staff training or travel. Supervisor Cowan.
Thank you, Chair. Last couple of weeks have been busy. Had a meeting with Greg Burns when he was in town. Also had to have some lunch with him as well. Find out what's going on at the federal level. We had a juvenile justice meeting. Mostly going on, we have a lot of new people, so going over what the roles and goals are for juvenile justice. Attended an airport authority meeting where we made a recommendation for a new airport director. Attended the Harbor District Strategic Planning meeting. That was interesting. It's, you know, a lot of ideas out there of what they can do. I was interviewed by the youth over at the Summer Youth Training Academy that's going on this summer over at College of the Redwoods. Joined a small group of people for the blessing and the raising of the flags over the Veterans Memorial. Had a meeting with some constituents over some concerns in the neighborhood. We continued that meeting over at CDD with Heidi and Dave and found some solutions that hopefully will work. Had a meeting with Senator McGuire last week along with 4 representatives from Sutter Coast Hospital discussing homelessness. Had a great 4th of July with my family, and I got to hike Fern Canyon all the way back yesterday. Hadn't done that in a while. It was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Berkowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At our last board meeting, I had a conference with Greg Burns, our lobbyist in Washington, D.C., which we discussed the future of Secure Rural Schools and Communities bill, along with the status of other opportunities that we should be behind, of course, concerning last chance grade, dredging of the harbor, and PILT. He also suggested that there's no better way to ensure that our voice is being heard than to actually be in Washington, D.C. I had a chance to travel to San Francisco and actually saw the conditions of the homeless on the streets. All of those I talked to agreed that the situation is getting so severe that the state may finally be forced to act. And when this does finally happen, our board, we should be prepared to make sure that rural communities are not left out of any solutions that are proposed. I participated in a very successful 4th of July parade. In talking with Bob Cochran, there were more entries than last year with many more floats. I want to thank the Smith River Postmaster Ken Miller for providing me with the 1963 Ford Galaxy that I was so fortunate to be on in the parade. Many people came up to me and said that the board seems to be on track with last chance grade and working for a cleaner county. And lastly, I want to thank Supervisor Gitlin for providing his home for a great vantage point to a large group of folks to watch the spectacular fireworks display. And that's my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Gitlin.
Okay, I also met with Greg Burns, our county lobbyist, and you heard some of my viewpoints on how we should proceed as a county. I attended the Harbor District Strategic Planning meeting, which was held June 27th, exchanged a lot of good ideas and how we can generate income for the Harbor District. Shortly after that, I met with our car club, the Northern Knights Car Club, and we're making plans to move forward with a Father's Day 2019 event at the Harbor having to do with the car show. So that will be a plus and create some income for the district. Regrettably attended the funeral of Kim Wiley. Very sad state of affairs, and it's quite a shocking passing for Kim. Our condolences go out to the Wiley family. Attended the grand opening of the Tractor Supply Company in the Jedediah Smith Center, just next door to, excuse me. I also participated in the July 4th parade. It was a great event, wonderful weather. Met with animal regulation to discuss some issues currently facing the shelter, which we'll be hearing about shortly, and met with Mr. Justin Riggs, who's the director, and he brought some things to my attention, which I'll share with the board in a future meeting. Observed the Patriots Point ceremony at the S-Curve also. Met with partners to set up our next Take a Bite Out of Blight cleanup, which has amended the date, which will be Saturday, July 21st on South 101. That's about 200 yards south of Anchor Way on the east side of the highway. We need volunteers, and please get in touch with me if you'd like to help us clean up that area. And on a personal note, I met and began my physical therapy with Del Norte Physical Therapy and starting the rehabilitation of my my spinal fusion. That's my report.
Thank you. Supervisor Hemmingson.
Yes, thank you. I also met with Greg Burns after our last Board of Supervisors meeting. Had a Border Coast Regional Airport Authority, as Supervisor Cowan spoke to. I also went to the Harbor Strategic Planning session down at the Harbor, at a tri-agency meeting. I celebrated my 45th wedding anniversary. Had a meeting with Grant Werschko, discussing things having to do with the collaborative. Went to the RCD office in Smith River, where we met with some representatives of the Farm Bureau, Linda Crockett and Rob Miller, Chris Howard, Randy Hooper, and Heidi Kunstel. Myself talked about the elk management plan, as well as the Sigma situation that we're presently in. Went to the Point of Honor flag raising ceremony, as was talked about at a local transportation commission meeting. Went to the deck party, celebrated 4th of July with friends and family, and I attended the Big Rock Water Settlement hearing. That was it for me.
Thank you, Supervisor. Part of this morning's discussion that we had here with Jeff Marzell attended the Gasky Fire Protection District, in this case the Forest Service piece of this, meeting up in Gasky, and that's why Jeff was here today. I thought it was very relevant to this community and what has been going on here in our backyard for the last couple decades, that we pay particular attention to this year's fire season, given our fuel loads the way they are, and more importantly, the low moisture content and risk. So that was a very informative meeting. I'm glad the Forest Service was able to join us today on that. Participated in a conference call with the California Department of Transportation, Federal Highways, and our facilitator that we hire through and support through the Del Norte Local Transportation Commission on last chance grade for the dry run that Kurt Stremberg presented to us this morning for July 19th. Everybody should have received a copy of this in the mail by now. It was mailed to every resident in Del Norte County. Hopefully we'll see a great community turnout on July 19th for a discussion on last chance grade. There's a lot of activity that has taken place to date out there, and more importantly, information that needs to be disseminated, the community needs to be aware of. Hope to see at that event on July 19th. Attended a mixer for Frank's Heating and Refrigeration. Also attended some training for Senate Bill 88, which was on surface water measurement and collection. Also, as Supervisor Hemmingson pointed out, the discussion around ELK and the State Groundwater Management Act and at the RCD office in Smith River to continually go over this data that is not factual, that is currently sitting in a model that keeps Del Norte County as a medium priority. Attended the Del Norte Local Transportation Commission, attended agenda review. As Supervisor Gitlin had brought up, attended the funeral of Kim Wiley, very important member of our Hiuchi community, very close with our family and their children, raising my children as sitters back in the day. It's sorry to see Kim pass. More importantly for Mike and the future of his family, our prayers are with you. As Supervisor Hemmingson mentioned, the Big Rock Community Service District Settlement Conference, and then also attended a meeting of our group, the most recent group to go to Ritsuzen, Takeda, Japan. We have a lot of energy behind this group right now to have conversations specific to culture, specific to education, specific to economics, but more importantly specific to emergency management and preparedness around that with tsunami. I think some of the next steps we're going to take here is to try to get a collective group together of all those past representatives who have made that trek to RT and begin to have a lot broader conversation and on some of those focus items. And that email will be coming out most likely from the city here fairly soon on getting us all back together in one place to discuss the importance of those conversations and this relationship with our new sister city. Also had that meeting with Greg Burns, as mentioned, to discuss issues specific to Washington, D.C. and the importance of being back there, hopefully fairly soon, but just in time to avoid the heat of summer. And I'll just end today with my a note to my mom and dad, and congratulations on making it 51 years. You're a great example for all of us. With that, we'll end this meeting. Meeting adjourned.